When Marvel announced infamous Iron Man, a lot of fans were immediately confused because the idea sounded surreal on paper. Doctor Doom becoming Iron Man. Not a fake version, not a temporary disguise for one issue. Victor Von Doom actually putting on armor, trying to act like a hero, and stepping into a role connected to Tony Stark after the events of Secret Wars. At that point, Doom had gone through massive changes. He had temporarily gained godlike power during Secret Wars, lost so much of his face scarring, and started questioning parts of his identity. Marvel pushed the idea that Victor genuinely wanted redemption and believed he could become something better than the tyrant he had been for decades. The concept itself was interesting because Doom had always seen himself as superior to everyone else intellectually and morally. So naturally, if he ever tried becoming a hero, he'd probably approach it with the same ego and intensity he uses as a villain. Fans felt like Doom lost parts of what made him special. Doctor Doom works so well because he isn't just another evil genius in armor. Doctor Doom is theatrical, arrogant, intimidating, philosophical, and deeply obsessed with power, legacy, and control. He rules Latveria like a dictator while genuinely believing he knows what's better for humanity. And that mix of intelligence, pride, and twisted nobility is what made him legendary in the first place. So when Marvel started portraying him as a more heroic figure wearing Iron Man style armor and helping people, the character lost part of his intimidation aura. Villains becoming anti-heroes can absolutely work sometimes, but Doom occupies a very specific place in Marvel lore. He's supposed to feel larger than life. Watching him fly around trying to solve crimes while occasionally acting closer to Tony Stark than Victor Von Doom, that's just bizarre. But that's not new to Marvel. Marvel sometimes has a trend of turning every popular villain into a morally grey anti-hero eventually. Just look at Magneto, Loki, Venom, Emma Frost, and many others. They had already gone through similar shifts at different points. So seeing Doom join that list, it kinda felt like Marvel was softening one of its greatest antagonists too much. Where do Peter Parker's powers really come from? For decades, Spider-Man's origin seemed incredibly straightforward. Peter Parker was bitten by a radioactive spider during a science demonstration, gained spider-like abilities, and became Spider-Man. That explanation remained largely untouched from the 1960s onward. Then, in the early 2000s, writer G. Michael Straczynski introduced a character named Ezekiel Sims, who completely changed the conversation. Ezekiel possessed powers almost identical to Peter's and claimed there was far more behind Spider-Man's abilities than a simple laboratory accident. According to him, Peter might be connected to ancient mystical forces tied to spiders, destiny, and something called the Spider Totem. Ezekiel's theory raised a question that immediately complicated Spider-Man's entire history. What if the radioactive spider was not the true source of Peter's powers? What if the spider has already been chosen by a supernatural force, and the radiation merely acted as the trigger? Throughout Straczynski's run, Peter encountered mystical beings, ancient spider, deities, and predators known as inheritors that haunted spider totems across the multiverse. The stories repeatedly suggested that Spider-Man's existence might have been part of a much larger cosmic design. Suddenly, the friendly neighborhood hero was connected to forces that stretched across dimensions and centuries. The problem is that Marvel never committed fully to either explanation. Plenty of stories continue to treat the radioactive spider bite as the complete origin of Peter's abilities. Scientific experiments, genetic mutations, clones, and alternate spider people all support the idea that Spider-Man's powers are rooted in biology. At the same time, major events like Spider-Verse and Spider-Geddon heavily embrace the mystical side of the mythology. These stories introduce the web of life and destiny, a vast cosmic network linking every spider hero across reality. The existence of that web seems to support Ezekiel's claims that spider-powered individuals are connected by something far larger than genetics alone. That leaves one of Spider-Man's most fascinating unanswered questions. So did the radioactive spider create Spider-Man, or did it simply awaken a destiny that was already waiting for Peter Parker? Marvel has provided evidence for both possibilities over the years, without ever delivering a final answer. As a result, nobody can say with complete certainty whether Spider-Man is the product of a scientific accident, a supernatural destiny, or a combination of both. The Legacy Virus storyline was Marvel's way of tackling the fear and confusion that surrounded the real AIDS epidemic in the 80s and early 90s. At the time, people were terrified of a disease they didn't understand. Governments were slow to act, and entire communities were stigmatized. Marvel mirrored that atmosphere by creating a mutant-only virus that spread unpredictably and created panic around the world. Just like AIDS, the Legacy Virus wasn't just about illness. It was about how society reacts when a marginalized group becomes associated with a mysterious, deadly disease. The metaphor was obvious. and Marvel used it to bring empathy and awareness into their stories. The virus begins as one of the most twisted pranks in X-Men history. Strife hands Mr. Sinister what he claims is priceless Summers DNA, only for Sinister's scientists to open the canister and unleash a deadly plague instead. The disease spreads quickly through mutant population, hitting young mutants especially hard. One of the victims is Illyana Rasputin, Colossus's little sister, whose death leaves the entire X-Men team shaken. Instead of being a typical comic book threat, the virus feels deeply personal. It destroys families, raises moral questions, and forces characters to confront their own helplessness. And Marvel made the Legacy Virus storyline even more emotional by tying the cure to a tragic choice. Beast eventually discovers a solution, but it requires a mutant to inject it into their bloodstream and die in the process. Colossus, already devastated by his sister's death, decides he won't let anyone else suffer the same fate. He transforms into steel, absorbs the cure, and activates it, knowing it will kill him instantly. His sacrifice spreads the cure across the world in seconds, ending the epidemic. For many readers, this moment felt like Marvel acknowledging the real sacrifices made by countless people who fought on the front lines of the AIDS crisis. However, ending the virus didn't magically fix everything. Its sudden disappearance completely changed the political landscape, especially in Genosha, where thousands of infected mutants were quarantined. Overnight, Magneto ended up with a fully restored army, giving him the numbers he needed for his next attempt at global domination. Meanwhile, Colossus didn't stay dead forever. Alien technology resurrected him, so he could be used as a test subject for a cure that took away mutant powers. In later years, the virus kept evolving both literally and symbolically. Anti-mutant groups tried to recreate their own versions to wipe out mutant populations. Skrulls discovered they were vulnerable to it, and even the US government accidentally used infected mutants as biological bombs. Each new appearance just showed that diseases don't just disappear from history. They leave scars, fears, and opportunities for abuse. And just like the real AIDS epidemic, the Legacy Virus became a long-term part of Marvel's world, shaping politics, public perception, and the emotional lives of mutants for years to come. That time, Black Panther held the Infinity Gauntlet. This happens during the events of Secret Wars. And like I mentioned, the incursions are happening, the multiverse is collapsing, and the entire universes are smashing into each other like cosmic car crashes. Everything is dying, and at the center of it all, Doctor Doom. Doom has stolen the power of the Beyonders and remade reality into Battleworld. He's basically God. So T'Challa and Namor are moving through Battleworld trying to figure out how to stop Doom. They end up in what used to be Doctor Strange's sanctum, because Strange had been Doom's sheriff and then, well, died. And this is where it gets good. Strange, being the smartest wizard in the room, had left something behind. A contingency, an Infinity Gauntlet, hidden and waiting. And not for Reed, not for Tony, but for Black Panther. T'Challa doesn't hesitate, he doesn't debate morality for 3 issues, he puts it on because reality is broken and someone has to fix it. Doom has rewritten existence in his own image, the multiverse is stitched together wrong, people are living false lives under false god, so Black Panther's motivation is simple: restore balance. When T'Challa confronts Doom, he activates the gauntlet and goes straight at him. You have God Emperor Doom versus Black Panther with the Infinity Gauntlet. That's a cosmic heavyweight fight. And for a moment, T'Challa overpowers him and wins the exchange. He uses the gauntlet to destabilize Doom's control, to expose the cracks in Battleworld, and that's enough, because once Doom falters, Reed is able to finish the job. So technically, Reed gets the final moment, but T'Challa opened the door. After Doom falls, reality is rebuilt, the multiverse is restored, Miles Morales ends up in the main 616 continuity because of this whole mess, entire cosmic structures get reset. In Black Panther, he gives up the gauntlet, no corruption arc, no slow descent into tyranny, he doesn't linger on the power, he used it for exactly what it was needed for, and lets it go. Santa Claus also held the Infinity Gauntlet. This happens in Marvel Holiday Spectacular back in 2009. Santa's reindeer are revealed to be Skrulls. I'm not joking. So Christmas is in danger because the shape-shifting alien empire infiltrated the North Pole. Iron Man, being Iron Man, calls together the Illuminati. Santa can deliver gifts without his reindeer. The world needs presents. So what's the solution? Let Santa borrow the Infinity Gauntlet. But then the power kicks in. Santa starts going a little unhinged, and suddenly you've got Santa with Gautier energy flowing through him. And this is my favorite part. Namor throws a snowball. Yes, a snowball. And it knocks the Infinity Gauntlet off Santa's hand. That's how the crisis ends. And then Tony Stark fixes the whole situation by giving Santa robotic reindeer, and the problem is solved. Christmas is saved, and the gauntlet returned. This is a holiday special. No multiverse collapses, no cosmic hierarchy changes, and the Infinity Gems go back to being irresponsible in the hands of the Illuminati. Invisible Woman's redesign. If there's one era Marvel fans always look back on with a mix of nostalgia and second-hand embarrassment, it's the 1990s. Sales were dropping, readers were shifting toward flashier characters like the X-Men, and classic teams like the Fantastic Four were starting to feel outdated. Marvel knew it. Writers knew it, and editors definitely knew it. So what did they do? They tried to reinvent everything. And I mean everything. New costumes, darker tones, edgier designs, and why is that? Grabbing attention fast, even if it meant completely abandoning what made these characters work in the first place. And unfortunately, Invisible Woman ended up right in the middle of that chaos. This whole thing really kicks off in the mid-90s, during a period where Sue Storm's dark persona Malice was still influencing her character. Now Sue had already gone through some serious character development. She was stronger, more confident, more assertive, but instead of expressing that through storytelling alone, Marvel decided to visually scream it at the audience by completely redesigning her outfit. We're talking full-on attention-grabbing overhaul that felt like it came straight out of a rated R comic. Sue's new costume ditched the iconic, clean blue and white Fantastic Four uniform for something way more revealing. You've got exposed shoulders, bare thighs, a cut-off midriff, and of course the infamous four-shaped boob window right in the center. And look, comic books have always had some level of exaggeration. But this felt extra. It didn't match Sue's personality at all. She's supposed to be one of the most composed, intelligent, and emotionally grounded members of the team, and suddenly she's dressed like she's trying to outshine every 90s anti-hero on the market. Marvel actually tried to justify this outfit in story. The idea was that Sue designed the costume to get the attention of her husband, Mr. Fantastic, because you know, he's always busy, always distracted, always deep in some scientific problem. So the logic was, hey, maybe if I wear something more eye-catching, he'll finally notice me. And okay, on paper that could have been a cute moment, I guess, but the execution just didn't land. So Marvel realized pretty quickly that this wasn't it. The costume didn't last long at all. Within just a handful of issues, Sue was already moving away from it and eventually returning to a more classic, practical look, and the outfit just kind of disappeared. What are the Beyonders, where do they come from, and what else is out in the Beyond? The Beyonders are easily one of the most confusing groups in Marvel because every major writer seems to add a new piece to the puzzle. Their earliest mentions describe them as beings from somewhere beyond the Marvel multiverse. Then came the Beyonder from the original Secret Wars, a character so powerful that he could reshape reality on a whim. Years later, Marvel introduced explanations, suggesting that this Beyonder might not have been a true Beyonder at all. One story even proposed that he was connected to a mutant and inhuman experiment that accidentally created a being with unimaginable power. Instead of clearing things up, each new explanation opened the door to even more questions about who the Beyonders actually are. Jonathan Hickman's run pushed the mystery to an entirely different level. Rather than focusing on a single Beyonder, he revealed an entire race known as the Ivory Kings. These beings existed outside the multiverse and operated on a scale that made most cosmic entities look insignificant. They created the destruction that led to the incursions, and eventually the collapse of countless universes. Their power was so absurd that they managed to kill the Living Tribunal. Hickman also described the original Beyonder as essentially a child of this race, suggesting that the incredibly powerful being from Secret Wars was merely a small glimpse of what the larger species was capable of. And their home is an even bigger mystery. The Beyonders reside in a place called the Beyond, a realm completely separated from the multiverse. Marvel has gradually expanded this concept into a vast unknown territory, sometimes referred to as the Mystery. The region stretches beyond the familiar cosmic structures like eternity, infinity, and the multiverse. According to later stories, the Beyond may be connected to the remains of the Second Cosmos, one of the earliest versions of reality that existed long before the current multiverse. The Beyonders settled there and developed the Beyonder rules that govern normal existence, and because of that, they view universes the same way a scientist might view experiments in a laboratory. The strangest part is that the Beyonders might not even be the only inhabitants of these outer realms. Al Ewing introduced the idea that there are multiple categories of beings occupying the Beyond, including the Examiners, Normalizers, Gardeners, and Debasers. Marvel has never fully explained what these groups are, how many of them exist, or what purpose they serve. Beyond them lie even stranger locations such as the Far Shore, the White Hot Room, the City of Judgment, and ultimately the House of Ideas. Every time Marvel explores these outer layers of reality, it becomes clear that the Beyonders are only one piece of a much larger cosmic landscape. After decades of stories, nobody knows where the chain ends, what created the Beyonders, or what other unimaginable powers might still be waiting in the darkness beyond the Beyond. Professor X's crush on a young Jean Grey. When X-Men 1 came out in 1963, Stanley and Jack Kirby were still figuring out the tone and direction of the series. The team was meant to be a group of teenage mutants learning to control their powers under the guidance of the wise and noble Professor Charles Xavier. But buried among all the science fiction and mutant metaphors, there's a weird, uncomfortable subplot. Professor X has romantic feelings for Jean Grey, his teenage student. At first, you can almost miss it. It's just hinted at in a few scenes. Jean, being the only girl on the team at the time, already had everyone from Cyclops to Angel crushing on her. But then in X-Men issue 3, readers got one of the strangest reveals in early Marvel history. In a quiet moment, Charles internally admits, "As though I could help worrying about the one I love, but I can never tell her. I have no right. Not while I'm the leader of the X-Men and confined to this wheelchair." And with that, the comic basically confirmed that the world's most respected mutant leader had a crush on a 16-year-old student. Now, in fairness, early comics weren't written with the same long-term continuity or sensitivity we expect today. Back then, Xavier wasn't necessarily meant to be the wise old mentor he became later. He was just prematurely bald, maybe in his early 30s. Still, even if you shave a few years off his age, that's a grown man having romantic thoughts about a teenage girl. It doesn't get less creepy with context, it just gets weird in a different way. Fans and writers quietly dropped the idea pretty quickly. Later stories completely ignored Xavier's early crush and instead focused on him as a father figure or moral leader. Jean's relationship with Cyclops became the emotional core of the series, and Xavier's romantic side was redirected toward adult women like Moira McTaggart and Lilandra. Marvel basically pretended the whole thing never happened, and honestly, that was probably the best move they could have made. Looking back, it's one of those relics from the awkward early years of superhero comics. Even brilliant creators like Lee and Kirby didn't always think through every subplot. Today, most fans treat it as a bizarre, slightly embarrassing footnote in X-Men history. Wolverine had claws, night vision, and he is a human lie detector. Wolverine is best known for his adamantium claws, powerful healing factor, and his brutal berserker rage. But those aren't the only abilities his mutation gives him. Logan's body enhances many of his natural senses and physical traits, making him far more than just a clawed brawler. Over the years, the comics have revealed several lesser-known abilities that make Wolverine function more like a highly evolved predator than a traditional superhero. One of those subtle abilities is night vision. Like many nocturnal hunters in the animal kingdom, Wolverine can see clearly in extremely low light conditions. This power allows him to move through darkness, spotting shapes and movement, even when the surroundings are nearly pitch black. Still, Wolverine rarely relies on this ability alone, often tracking enemies using even his sharper senses of smell and hearing. Those heightened senses also make Wolverine an incredibly effective human lie detector. By paying attention to tiny physiological changes like a shift in someone's heartbeat, the scent of nervous sweat, or a subtle change in tone of voice, Logan can often tell when someone is lying. His sense of smell is also precise, that he once figured out Peter Parker was Spider-Man simply by recognizing his scent, even though he had never met Peter before. At one point, Marvel even experimented with giving Wolverine a much stranger power known as Hot Claws. After being revived in the 2019 storyline Return of Wolverine, Logan's healing factor was temporarily pushed beyond its normal limits. Whenever he entered a berserker rage, his adamantium claws would heat up until they glowed red hot, allowing him to not only cut through enemies, but also burn anything he struck. The visual looked dramatic, but the ability didn't last long. When the X-Men line was rebooted later that year with House of X and Powers of X, the Hot Claws were quietly dropped, leaving them as one of the weirdest and shortest-lived upgrades in Wolverine's long history. World War II. It is basically where Marvel's superhero universe starts. Captain America, Bucky, Namor, and the original Human Torch were all created during the war, not as metaphors, but as direct responses to real Nazi aggression. Captain America's first comic famously showed him punching Hitler months before the US even entered the war, reflecting the mood of creators who wanted to rally support. These early heroes weren't fighting aliens or cosmic threats, they were fighting literal Nazi soldiers, saboteurs, and propaganda machines. It set the tone for Marvel's belief that superheroes should exist in the same world ordinary people live in. Marvel often uses World War II to tell deeply personal stories of survival, especially through Magneto's backstory. His childhood shows the rise of anti-Semitism, the Nuremberg laws, forced relocations, and later the grim reality of ghettos like Warsaw. These aren't watered-down comic book versions. Marvel portrays the fear, the humiliation, and injustice Jewish families face daily. When Max's family is deported, attacked, and eventually brutally murdered, it becomes a defining part of who he becomes. And yes, while Marvel keeps the human suffering real, it adds fictional layers on top, like the various super soldier experiments inspired by real wartime science. Captain America comes from one of these programs, meant to turn civilians into perfect soldiers. Other characters like the Destroyer, Wolverine, and Isaiah Bradley show different outcomes of government experimentation, some heroic and others tragic. And Marvel blends sci-fi with history to explore themes like exploitation, nationalism, and the way governments justify extreme actions during wartime. And these war stories feature classic combat scenes, trenches, espionage, missions, sabotage operations, but with superheroes thrown into the mix. Captain America and Bucky join the Allies in taking down Nazi strongholds, while Namor attacks Axis ships from the ocean. Hydra, Marvel's fictional, sci-fi extension of the Nazi war machine, gives the heroes a more super enemy they can punch without trivializing real-world soldiers. And by balancing realistic war settings with over-the-top villains, Marvel makes the stories thrilling while still respecting the gravity of the real conflict. And it also explores the end of the war and its long shadow. Captain America witnesses concentration camps being liberated and is visibly horrified by the scale of the atrocities. Survivors like Magneto carry their trauma into the modern era, shaping their beliefs about humanity and conflict. Many villains, including Baron Zemo, Red Skull, and surviving Hydra leaders, carry Nazi ideology into the present. So it continues to influence politics, characters, and storylines decades later. What happens to the personification of the Fourth Multiverse that changes it to the Never Queen? The story begins with the Fourth Cosmos, one of the previous versions of reality that existed long before the current Marvel Multiverse. Every cosmos in Marvel has its own living embodiment. Just like the modern multiverse is represented by eternity, the sentient being of the Fourth Cosmos was known as the Pilgrim. When its era came to an end, it didn't simply die alongside the universe it represented. Instead, it chose a completely different path. Rather than disappearing, the Pilgrim traveled into the deepest, unknown regions beyond reality, venturing into a place Marvel refers to as the Mystery. This journey separated it from the cycle that most previous cosmic incarnations seem to follow. As the Pilgrim moved through this strange realm, it gradually abandoned everything connected to its old existence. The cosmic energies, concepts, and archetypes that once defined the Fourth Cosmos were left behind. Those remnants would eventually help save the Fifth Cosmos, the next version of reality. What continued forward was no longer the same being that had once represented an entire universe. The Pilgrim underwent a fundamental transformation, evolving into something completely new. Instead of embodying what exists, it became tied to everything that could exist. And that transformation gave birth to the Never Queen, one of the strangest cosmic entities Marvel has ever introduced. While eternity represents all existence within the current multiverse, the Never Queen governs possibility itself. She is connected to alternate futures, unrealized timelines, abandoned outcomes, and every path reality could potentially take. Her domain is the land of couldn't be shouldn't be, a region filled with ideas, possibilities, and unrealized concepts that never became part of the main universe. From there, she watches over an endless sea of potential futures stretching in every direction. The reason this revelation surprised so many people is because earlier stories implied that the Fourth Cosmos would eventually return alongside the other previous incarnations of reality. When Al Ewing finally revisited the Mystery, the Fourth Cosmos was nowhere to be found. In its place stood the Never Queen. The transformation itself was explained, but the deeper implications, not so. The being that once represented an entire multiverse had evolved into something far more abstract, becoming the living embodiment of possibility rather than existence. Today, the Never Queen occupies a unique place in Marvel's cosmic hierarchy and even shares a close connection with eternity, representing the relationship between what is and what might one day be. So the unanswered question here is why? None of the other previous cosmoses underwent a similar change. Darkseid held the Infinity Gauntlet. This happens in GLA Avengers in 2003. It is written by Kurt Busiek with art by George Perez, and it is considered one of the greatest DC Marvel crossovers ever made. Oversized issues, full cosmic madness, and absolute fan service perfection. And in the middle of that crossover scavenger hunt, the Infinity Gauntlet ends up on Apocalypse, which is like hiding a nuclear launch code inside a volcano owned by a god of tyranny. So here's the setup. The Avengers and the Justice League are forced by cosmic beings to compete with each other by collecting powerful artifacts from each other's universes. We're talking the Ultimate Nullifier, the Green Lantern Power Battery, the Medusa Mask, all that good stuff. And one of those artifacts, the Infinity Gauntlet. Now somehow it ends up stored on Apocalypse, Darkseid's home planet, which is already ruled by an evil god obsessed with the anti-life equation. So naturally, Darkseid gets his stone-faced hands on it. And you're sitting there thinking, oh no, because Darkseid with the Infinity Gauntlet sounds like the end of literally everything. And here's where the crossover logic kicks in. The Infinity Gauntlet only works works within the Marvel Universe. The Infinity Gems are tied to Marvel's cosmic structure. When the Gauntlet is brought into the DC Universe, it doesn't work at all. Darkseid puts it on, he expects omnipotence, he expects control over existence, and instead, there's nothing. It's basically Thanos' very expensive glove. Of course, Darkseid being Darkseid, he doesn't just give up immediately, he analyzes it, studies it, tries to understand why it isn't functioning, because if it did work, he would absolutely combine it with the anti-life equation. But the crossover makes it clear. Cosmic artifacts are universe-specific. Marvel's Infinity Gems don't obey DC's laws of reality. In the grand scheme, no universe gets erased, no god-tier takeover happens, the Gauntlet becomes a non-factor once everyone realizes it's inert in DC continuity. The heroes still clash, the crossover still escalates, but Darkseid never gets to snap or reshape reality. And honestly, that's the only reason the multiverse survives that story. 616 Scarlet Spider, or Ben Reilly, holds the record for the highest amount of deaths. Ben Reilly, the Scarlet Spider, has died more times than almost any major Marvel character because of cloning, resurrection cycles, retcons, beyond storyline resets, and multiple return from the dead arcs. Ben's life became a loop of dying, coming back, dying again, and coming back again. Fans have counted well over 20 confirmed deaths, which is why people often say he holds the record. And what makes this even crazier is that Marvel actually acknowledged this inside the universe itself. Death, literally the embodiment of death, has commented on how absurdly often Ben dies. She treats it as a running cosmic joke, almost like even she is tired of seeing him show up again after being gone. Most characters in Marvel are lucky if they die once or twice. With Ben, it became part of his story identity, and his repeating cycle of death didn't just happen in one era either. It happened across Clone Saga, later Clone Experiments, modern storylines, alternate forms, and especially the recent Beyond era that turned him into Chasm. Each time writers tried to reinvent him, it usually came with another death or collapse that reset his status. Sabretooth beats Wolverine every year. Sabretooth and Wolverine have one of the most brutal rivalries in all of Marvel Comics, and one of the darkest parts of that rivalry is a twisted tradition Sabretooth used to follow. In older stories, Sabretooth would track Wolverine down every year on his birthday, specifically just to beat him, humiliate him, and remind him that he was weaker. This wasn't just about winning a fight, it was psychological torture meant to break Logan on an emotional level. These yearly attacks became part of Wolverine's trauma. His birthday wasn't something he looked forward to, it was something he dreaded because he knew Sabretooth might suddenly appear and put him through hell again. Sabretooth didn't do this to kill him. He did it because hurting Logan mentally was more satisfying for him than ending his life. He enjoyed watching Wolverine fail, panic, and suffer. Even though modern Marvel stories have changed and evolved their dynamic, this tradition was a real part of their history and helped define why Logan hates and fears Sabretooth on a deeper level than most villains. It wasn't just one brutal fight. It was a repeated cycle that wore on Wolverine over many years. Wolverine went back in time with Spider-Man and taught early people how to brew alcohol. In one of Marvel's Stranger Time travel adventures, Wolverine and Spider-Man ended up getting thrown back into prehistoric times. While they were stuck there, they actually decided to make history a little more interesting. They taught early humans how to brew alcohol, basically introducing beer to ancient civilization way earlier than it should have existed. Logan did it casually, like it was just a normal skill to pass on. It wasn't done as a heroic culture contribution. It was more like his rough humor and why not attitude. To him, it was just something humans were going to invent eventually anyway, so he just helped them speed it up a bit. Spider-Man was obviously shocked because he realized how insane it was that Wolverine was literally altering human development in the past. This wasn't a small butterfly effect moment, this was a major historical influence made just because Wolverine felt like it. Angel's blood has healing properties. In the early 2000s, Marvel introduced the concept of secondary mutations, where certain mutants developed additional powers beyond their original abilities. Some of the most famous examples include Beast, whose already unusual appearance evolved into a more feline form, and Emma Frost, who gained the ability to transform her body into organic diamond alongside her telepathy. Around the same time, Angel also manifested a surprising secondary mutation, though it's far less widely known. Angel discovered that his blood possessed powerful healing properties. If someone with the same blood type received his blood, it could rapidly heal injuries and potentially save lives. This ability made Angel's blood almost like a living cure, capable of restoring others in ways normal medicine couldn't. The revelation added an interesting layer to Warren's powers, since his abilities had traditionally been limited to flight thanks to his large feathered wings and the enhanced physical attributes. What makes this power even more mysterious is that Marvel never fully explained whether Angel had always possessed this mutation or if it developed later. Another winged mutant, Icarus, had healing powers connected to his wings, which suggests that winged mutants might share similar biological traits. However, the comics intentionally kept the origins of Angel's healing blood somewhat vague. The experiments of the High Evolutionary. His entire life revolves around one obsession: evolution. He believes that life can be perfected through science and that he has the right to guide the evolution of entire species. The High Evolutionary sees himself as a kind of cosmic scientist. He's trying to rebuild life itself according to what he believes is a more advanced form. But that ambition leads him to perform experiments on living beings without any regard for their suffering. To him, creatures are simply test subjects in a massive evolutionary experiment. One of the High Evolutionary's most famous experiments involved taking ordinary animals and artificially accelerating their evolution. Using advanced genetic technology, he altered their DNA and transformed them into intelligent, humanoid creatures known as the New Men. These beings were animals that had been reshaped to walk upright, speak, think, and behave like humans. They lived in societies created by him and were meant to represent the next stage of life. But the process wasn't perfect. Many of these creations were unstable, suffering from physical mutations or mental instability. They were forced into an existence they never chose. The High Evolutionary didn't stop at creating new species, he also created an entire planet called Counter-Earth. This world was meant to be a massive experiment where he could observe how life evolved under controlled conditions. He populated the planet with his evolved creations and tried to shape their society into a more advanced civilization. In his mind, this was a perfect laboratory where he could watch evolution unfold on a planetary scale. However, things quickly spiraled out of control, with crime, corruption, and violence beginning to appear on Counter-Earth just like on the real Earth. And instead of accepting imperfections, he often becomes furious and destroys his own creation. So when Counter-Earth developed problems he didn't expect, he considered wiping out the entire planet just to erase what he saw as a failed experiment. To him, billions of lives meant nothing compared to the disappointment of a scientific result that didn't meet his expectations. Throughout Marvel history, the High Evolutionary has continued experimenting with genetics, mutation, and biological engineering. He has altered the humans, animals, and mutants alike in his search for the perfect evolutionary form. Who are the Black Priests? They were introduced in Jonathan Hickman's massive Avengers saga, and they first appeared during the Incursion Crisis. While other cosmic factions had clear motives and origins, the Black Priests seemed to emerge from nowhere. They were incredibly powerful sorcerers, capable of manipulating reality, traveling between universes, and destroying entire worlds when necessary. Whenever two universes were about to collide, the priests would often destroy one of the Earths involved, preventing the complete annihilation of both realities. They operated almost like a collective intelligence rather than a normal organization. Each member embodied a specific word or concept that formed part of a larger magical language. By speaking these words together in the proper sequence, they could rewrite reality on a massive scale. Their power depended on the group remaining complete. If a priest died, the word they carried vanished with them, weakening the entire system. This created the impression that the Black Priests were less like individual people and more like pieces of a larger cosmic mechanism working toward a shared purpose. The mystery begins when you ask where they came from. Hickman provided extensive explanations for many of the strange factions involved in the incursions. The Mapmakers received an origin. The Black Swans received an origin. The Black Priests never got that treatment. At one point, Doctor Strange secretly joined their ranks and eventually became their leader, earning the title of Eye of Eyes. Even through Strange's involvement, Marvel never revealed who created the priests, what civilization produced them, or how their strange, magical structure came into existence. They simply appeared as an already established force operating across countless realities. Doctor Doom offered the closest thing to an explanation, but even he was only guessing. He theorized that the Black Priests might be a natural defense mechanism created by the multiverse itself. In his view, they functioned like antibodies, responding to an infection. The Beyonders were secretly destroying reality from the outside, and the Black Priests emerged as part of the multiverse's attempt to survive. The timing seems to support that idea, since the priests appeared around the same era as other multiversal phenomena linked to the incursions. However, nobody ever confirmed Doom's theory. So yeah, we know what they do, we know how they operate, we know they played a crucial role during one of Marvel's biggest cosmic disasters, but after all these years, nobody knows who created them, where they came from, or whether Doom's explanation was correct at all. Human experiments. The Human are one of the creepiest organizations in the X-Men universe. Unlike scientists who accidentally create monsters through experiments, the Human deliberately pursue mutation as a kind of twisted religious goal. They follow a belief system called transspeciesism, the idea that humans must evolve into a new form of life by becoming something closer to mutants. To them, mutants represent the next stage of evolution, and they refuse to accept that they were born human. Instead of waiting for natural evolution, they decided to force the process themselves through science. Their goal was to create what they called the third species, humans artificially upgraded with mutant abilities. But the methods they chose to reach that goal were extremely disturbing. To gain mutant powers, the human began abducting mutants and harvesting their organs. Their members believed that by surgically grafting mutant body parts onto their own bodies, they could inherit the abilities connected to those organs. Mutants were captured, imprisoned, and treated like spare parts. Their skin, eyes, limbs, and internal organs were removed in secret medical procedures carried out in hidden laboratories. These parts were then transplanted into human members who hoped the mutant DNA would grant them powers. Some victims were killed during the process, while others were kept alive so more body parts could be harvested later. And this turned the human into something resembling a black market mutant organ trafficking ring. Human also experimented with genetic modification, mutant blood transfusions, and chemical compounds designed to trigger mutation. One of the substances they used was something known as X-hormone, a mutagenic compound connected to mutant DNA. Members injected themselves with mutant blood or experimental serums, hoping to trigger powers within their bodies. These procedures were incredibly unstable and dangerous, often resulting in painful side effects or grotesque mutations. Despite the risks, the human continued these experiments because they believed suffering was simply part of the process of becoming something greater than human. The human eventually drew the attention of the X-Men after several mutant kidnappings were traced back to them. During one encounter, a special class of students at Xavier's Institute discovered a group of human and confronted them directly. On another occasion, a group of young mutants, led by Kid Omega, attacked a human base while the group was in the middle of a surgical procedure transferring mutant body parts. So yeah, mutants here aren't treated as people. They are treated as biological upgrades that can be stolen and installed into someone else's body. Entire lives are destroyed, just so members of the cult can chase the dream of becoming something more powerful. Reed Richards held the Infinity Gauntlet, but also a bunch of Reed Richards held the Infinity Gauntlet. This all spins out of Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, where we meet the Council of Reeds, an interdimensional collection of Reed Richards variants from across the multiverse. And when you first see them standing together, you immediately notice something. Some of them are wearing Infinity Gauntlets, not all of them, just the ones in charge. That visual alone, it tells you everything. The idea is simple. Every Reed Richards eventually reaches a point where he decides to solve everything. Not just crime, not just Earth's problems, I'm talking everything like disease, war, cosmic instability, multiversal entropy. These Reeds band together to share knowledge and coordinate solutions across realities, and some of them, they already succeeded. They use the Infinity Gauntlet in their own universes to fix things permanently, poverty gone, threats neutralized, chaos stabilized, and instead of becoming tyrants, they moved on to help other realities. Now here's the important part. The Reed Richards from the main Marvel universe, Earth 616, is invited to join them. They basically tell him, you can solve everything, but you have to dedicate yourself completely. No family, no Sue, no kids, no distractions. And Reed says no. He refuses to abandon his family, which sounds small in a cosmic context, but it is huge, because the other Reeds made that sacrifice. They chose progress over love, efficiency over attachment, and 616 Reed chooses humanity. And here's the kicker. Later on, the Celestials wipe out most of the Council of Reeds anyway, so all that sacrifice, all that occult calculation didn't save them. The inappropriate relationship between Colossus and Kitty Pryde. The X-Men have always been known for their relationships just as much as their powers. You've got classics like Cyclops and Jean Grey, Rogue and Gambit, even Storm and Forge. These relationships help define the emotional core of the team, but not every X-Men romance aged well. And one of the most uncomfortable to look back on is between Kitty Pryde and Colossus, because unlike the others, this one started with an age gap that's hard to ignore. Kitty Pryde was introduced in Uncanny X-Men 129 by Chris Claremont and John Byrne, and right from the start she was young, like really young. She was around 13 or 14 years old when she joined the team. Meanwhile, Colossus was portrayed as being around 18 to 19 at the time. So when their relationship started developing, the age gap was right there on the page. And while Kitty having a crush on Colossus, that's normal. That's something a lot of people can relate to. But the story didn't just stop there. It actually leaned into the idea of a real relationship forming between them. The comics didn't really treat the situation as problematic. Instead, it was framed as a sweet, innocent romance. There are moments of flirting, emotional bonding, and even kissing, all presented like this is just another X-Men love story. But when you actually stop and think about it, it's a 14-year-old girl and a guy who's basically an adult. And the fact that it wasn't really questioned at the time makes it stand out even more today. The issue isn't that Kitty had feelings, it's that the narrative allowed those feelings to be normalized. Today, writers would handle this this very differently, either by keeping it one-sided or addressing the age gap directly. But back then, they didn't do that. To be fair, as time went on, both Kitty Pryde and Colossus grew up, and their relationship became a lot more normal once they were both adults. Deadpool versus Undead Presidents. Only Deadpool could end up fighting zombie presidents and somehow make it feel like a normal Tuesday. In Deadpool Volume 5, Issue 1-6 in 2012, Marvel kicked off one of the wildest and funniest storylines in Wade Wilson's entire history. The premise: a well-meaning S.H.I.E.L.D. agent decides to fix America by using dark magic to resurrect every deceased US president. Predictably, that goes about as well as you'd expect. The presidents come back cranky, rotten, and ready to tear the country apart. Since the Avengers couldn't be seen on camera fighting zombie versions of George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, bad PR obviously, S.H.I.E.L.D. turns to the one guy whose reputation can't get any worse, and that would be Deadpool. Wade accepts the job, mostly for the paycheck, and sets out to kill America's most beloved historical figures all over again. Each undead president keeps their original quirks and personality traits. Teddy Roosevelt hunts zombies for fun, Gerald Ford keeps tripping over everything, and JFK is still a ladies' man. Deadpool, armed with guns, swords, and terrible jokes, cuts his way through the Presidential Hall of Fame like he's auditioning for a history book written by Quentin Tarantino. One of the funniest touches is Wade's ghostly sidekick, Benjamin Franklin, who keeps reminding Deadpool that he was never actually president. Together, they take down the rotting founding fathers, culminating in a final showdown against George Washington himself. Their battle ends with Wade ripping off Washington's head and punching it like a football, because of course it does. It's a ridiculous, over-the-top, and perfectly Deadpool story, blending ultra-violence, history jokes, and self-awareness in the best way possible. Dead Presidents isn't just one of the biggest WTF moments in Marvel, it's a perfect example of how only Deadpool can make something this absurd feel like peak entertainment. Spider-Man had a real problem with protests. From day one, Peter Parker wasn't some perfect hero. He struggled with money, school, relationships, and just life in general. That's what made the early Amazing Spider-Man run so special. Peter felt like a real person living in a real world. But toward the end of Ditko's time on the book, something started to shift. The tone got a bit more rigid, a bit more opinionated, and it wasn't just about villains or superhero drama anymore. It started creeping into how Peter viewed real-world issues. By the mid-1960s, especially around The Amazing Spider-Man issue 36 to 38, you can start to feel Steve Ditko's personal philosophy influencing the comic more directly. Ditko was heavily inspired by objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand, which emphasized individual responsibility, discipline, and a strong dislike for collective movements like protests. And this is where things get interesting, because the 1960s were full of protests, civil rights movements, anti-war demonstrations, student activism. It was everywhere. So naturally, those real-world events started showing up in comics. But instead of presenting them neutrally, Ditko's perspective came through pretty clearly in how they were portrayed. In The Amazing Spider-Man issue 38, by the way, Ditko's final issue before leaving Marvel, there's a scene where Peter arrives at college and encounters a group of student protesters. Now you'd expect Peter, the underground hero who's been misunderstood his whole life, to maybe sympathize a little, but no. He came off as annoyed, dismissive, even borderline disgusted by them. Visually, Ditko draws the protesters in a chaotic, almost negative light, and Peter's body language makes it clear he's not on their side. What's really interesting though is that Stan Lee seems to try and soften this through dialogue and thought bubbles, almost like he's trying to balance Ditko's harsher take. You can feel this weird tension between the art and the writing, like two different perspectives fighting on the same page. The problem is, this doesn't really feel like Peter Parker. This is a character who's been bullied, judged, and constantly misunderstood. If anyone should understand people standing up for what they believe in, it's him. So seeing him react so negatively to protests feels kind of off. When a character stops feeling like themselves and starts reflecting the creator too directly, it breaks that connection with the audience. There's a Marvel villain who is a sentient chunk of wall. Marvel has created thousands of characters over the decades, so it was only a matter of time before things got weird. And yeah, one of the strangest examples is a villain who is literally a wall, and his story is as ridiculous as it sounds. After a construction accident, instead of being crushed by bricks, he somehow fused with them. The result, a sentient chunk of wall with just his legs sticking out. This version of him comes from an alternate universe, Earth 57-780, and he's exactly what you're imagining. No arms, no real movement, just a human brick, hybrid existence. It's not even played as a serious, terrifying villain either. He appeared in a more lighthearted comic, Super Spidey Stories issue 8, which was aimed at younger readers. Marvel created a superhero for a 4-year-old child. Marvel has always had a strong connection with its fans, but this story takes that to a whole different level. A 4-year-old boy named Anthony didn't want to wear his hearing aid because he never saw any superheroes who looked like him. So his mom reached out to Marvel Comics hoping for something, anything that could help, and instead of just sending a nice reply, Marvel actually decided to create something just for him. That's how a brand new hero was born, Blue Ear, inspired by Anthony's blue hearing aid. Marvel artists and writers designed a superhero who proudly wore one too. They even tied it into existing lore by referencing Hawkeye, who in some comics had hearing loss and used hearing aids as well. Suddenly Anthony wasn't alone anymore. He had a superhero who looked like him, and even better, he was told that if he wore his hearing aid, he could be an honorary Avenger. But Marvel didn't stop there. They partnered with organizations like the Children's Hearing Institute to turn this into something bigger, spreading awareness about hearing health for kids. And Blue Ear even appeared alongside Iron Man in a special comic. It's honestly one of the most wholesome things Marvel has ever done. Out of all the crazy powers and epic battles, sometimes the most impactful stories are the smallest ones. They help a kid feel seen, understood, and proud of who he is. And that's kind of what superheroes are supposed to do in the first place. Wolverine's weakness is sinking. As you know, Wolverine can heal from almost anything. We're talking about bullets, explosions, blades, fire, a nuclear bomb, you name it. His healing factor shrugs it off. Plus, his skeleton is coated in adamantium. Mind you, the strongest metal on Earth, making him nearly indestructible in close combat. But that same metal turns water into his worst nightmare. Adamantium is insanely dense. So dense that Logan's body loses almost all natural buoyancy. And here's where it gets serious. His healing factor is incredible, but it still needs oxygen. His brain can't function without it. If he's trapped underwater long enough, his cells die faster than they can regenerate, so he can't just heal from drowning forever. At some point, he stays dead. This isn't hypothetical. Logan has used this exact weakness in some storylines, including against his own son Daken. So if you want to take someone out with a healing factor and metal bones, you don't stab them, you sink them. It's kind of funny when you think about it. Wolverine can fight gods, ninjas, robots, and armies without even blinking, but a deep lake, a pool, or the ocean is a legitimate life-threatening situation. That time, Captain America held the Infinity Gauntlet. And this goes down in New Avengers, written by Jonathan Hickman, and this isn't some cosmic fantasy moment where Cap grabs the gauntlet to fight a god. This is way darker than that. The Illuminati and Steve discover something horrifying. Another Earth is literally colliding with theirs. Two universes smashing together in what they call an incursion. And when that happens, both universes die, completely erased. So yeah, the stakes are high. Now here's the important thing. The Illuminati had already gathered the Infinity Gems earlier. They had split them among themselves, so no one person can wield the gauntlet again. But this was an extinction level emergency. So they reassembled the gems, and when it comes time to decide who should use it, they give it to Steve Rogers. Out of all the geniuses and kings in the room, they trust the soldier, because if anyone is going to try to save two universes without abusing the power, it's Captain America. So Cap puts on the gauntlet and tries to push the other Earth away. That's the goal, not destroy it, not erase it, just to stop the collision and save both worlds. Even with all 6 gems, the task is too much. The gauntlet strains, the stones crack under the pressure, one by one they shatter. Cap isn't weak, his will isn't lacking, the problem is scale. The multiversal collapse is bigger than even omnipotence. Now the Illuminati are out of options. The gauntlet is destroyed, the time stone survives briefly, but the rest are gone. And with minutes left before impact, the only way to save their Earth is to destroy the other one. Steve refuses. He will not sign off on genocide, not even to save his own world. That's not who he is. And this is where the story gets heavy. The rest of the Illuminati decide to move forward without him. They wipe his memory of the group and remove him from the decision-making process because they know he'll never agree. Cap's failure isn't just a single tragic event, it's the beginning of the slow spiral towards Secret Wars. Red Hulk overheats if he gets angry. He was created to be the better Hulk, smarter, more tactical, and more controlled. General Ross finally became the monster he chased for years, except his version came with a very annoying design flaw. The angrier he gets, the hotter he gets. Literally, his body temperature skyrockets. He radiates heat so intensely that he can melt pavement by standing on it. In early appearances, he was basically a walking blast furnace, burning everything around him just by existing. Looks awesome, terrible for long fights. Here's the problem. Unlike the Green Hulk, whose durability scales with anger, Red Hulk has a hard thermal ceiling. If he gets too angry, his body overheats to the point where his internal systems start shutting down. He can literally knock himself out by getting too mad. He can't go berserk. He has to pace himself. He has to think mid-fight. Am I about to overheat? Meanwhile, the Green Hulk never worries about that. The Green Hulk can rage forever. Red Hulk, however, has a timer ticking in the background. So technically, an opponent doesn't need to beat him. They just need to stall. Taskmaster's weakness is Deadpool's unhinged brain. Taskmaster has one of the cleanest powers in Marvel, and that's photographic reflexes. He watches you fight for a few seconds, and now he can fight exactly like you. Captain America's shield work, copied. Hawkeye's aim, also copied. Black Widow's martial arts, downloaded into his brain like a fighting USB drive. This power works because most fighters are logical, they follow styles, rhythms, patterns. Then he met Deadpool. Deadpool doesn't fight with any discipline, system, or consistent logic. He'll punish, then randomly dance, then shoot the floor, then stab himself for no reason, then start talking to someone who isn't there. There's no martial arts style, no rhythm, and no structure. So when Taskmaster tries to copy him, his brain basically hits a buffering screen. There's nothing to learn. Taskmaster's whole advantage is prediction. Once he learns your style, he can anticipate your next move before you even make it. But Deadpool doesn't know what he's going to do next, so Taskmaster can't either. His power, which relies on clean data, gets fed pure chaos. It's like trying to learn chess by watching someone throw the pieces at the wall. Comics have shown that trying to process Deadpool's movements actually overwhelms Taskmaster. His neural pathways get tangled because the actions don't map to any known combat logic. Marvel has always been based in New York City. Instead of inventing fictional cities, Marvel leaned into real places. That's why characters like Spider-Man swing through Queens, Daredevil projects Hell's Kitchen, and the Avengers operate right out of Manhattan. The city is part of the identity of the entire universe, and this isn't just a storytelling choice, it comes from real life. Since its early days, Marvel has always had its headquarters in New York, moving between different offices, but never really leaving the city. Over the decades, they've been located on famous spots like Madison Avenue, Park Avenue, and even inside the Empire State Building. So when writers were creating stories, they were literally writing about the streets outside their windows. That connection gave Marvel a very different tone compared to other publishers. The heroes felt more real because they lived in the same world as the readers. You could walk down a street in New York and think, yeah, Spider-Man could swing past here. That level of realism made characters more relatable, especially when combined with their personal struggles and everyday problems. Even today, that DNA is still there. Marvel might be a global brand now, but New York is still at its core. It's where the company grew, where its biggest characters were shaped, and where so many of its stories still began. Spider-Man's weakness is basically bug spray. The man can lift cars, dodge bullets, sense danger before it happens, but there's a very old, very weird weakness in his history that sounds like a joke. Certain chemicals used in pesticides can mess him up badly. Not magic, not alien tech, literal lab grade kill the bugs in your kitchen type stuff. It's the most on-the-nose weakness you could give a guy whose powers come from a spider. One chemical that's popped up in older stories is ethyl chloride. In aerosol form, it can dull Peter's spider sense, make him dizzy, and weaken him enough to actually put him on the back foot. His metabolism usually burns through toxins like nothing, but this stuff specifically bypasses a lot of his resistance because it interacts badly with the arachnite side of his mutation. Peter Parker is a genius level scientist. He fights supervillains with advanced tech, alien symbiotes, time travelers, and demonic entities. Yet there exists a scenario where a villain could realistically knock him out with something that belongs in a pest control aisle. It makes Spider-Man feel way less like a cosmic tier hero and way more like a really advanced bug. I mean, it makes sense. If you get spider powers, might as well get their weaknesses. But over time, writers moved away from it because it's honestly too easy and too goofy. Modern villains would rather build jet lasers and giant robots than carry around a spray bottle that could end the fight in 10 seconds. Hulk versus puppies. Yes, really. Rage is Hulk's fuel. The more furious he is, the more unstoppable he gets. You don't outmuscle Hulk, you don't outgun Hulk, you don't outsmart Hulk, you just pray he calms down before he levels a city. And somehow in Marvel canon, one of the most effective ways to do that is with puppies. Yes, actual puppies. Hulk is deeply childlike. That's always been part of the psychology of the character. He's emotionally stunted, traumatized, and reacts to the world like a giant angry kid who doesn't know how to process his feelings. So when something pure, harmless, and affectionate shows up, like a bunch of small dogs wagging their tails and licking his face, it short-circuits the rage cycle. His brain can't stay in smash mode when confronted with something that triggers comfort instead of threat. At one point, S.H.I.E.L.D. realizes this and uses it as a strategy. Not missiles, not Hulkbuster armor, but a crate of puppies. Drop them near Hulk and watch the anger drain out of him as he gets distracted by tiny animals climbing all over him. The rage fades, the transformation reverses, and Banner comes back, mission accomplished. As ridiculous as it sounds, it actually fits. Hulk lashes out because the world feels hostile. Puppies represent the exact opposite. Unconditional affection, no threat, and no fear. It is the emotional equivalent of turning off a fire alarm. Domino and Chicken. Domino has one of the coolest mutant abilities in Marvel. She subconsciously manipulates probability in her favor. Bullets miss, explosions don't touch her, guns jam at the perfect time. She can walk through chaos like the universe itself is protecting her, unless there's a chicken nearby. Domino suffers from electrophobia, an intense and very real fear of chickens. And here's the funny part. Her luck power can't do anything about it. Because the problem isn't physical danger, it's psychological. Her mutation can bend reality to keep her safe, but it can't stop her brain from going into full panic mode at the sight of a clucking farm bird. Luck doesn't fix phobias here. This is a woman who can stare down mercenaries, mutants, and murder machines without blinking. But put a chicken in the room, and she's suddenly hyperventilating, backing away, and losing composure completely. It's been played for laughs multiple times, especially when Deadpool is around to make it worse. Venom's chocolate cravings instead of brains. Venom used to be terrifying for a very simple reason. The symbiote constantly talked about eating people's brains. It made the character feel feral and alien in a way Spider-Man villains usually aren't. This wasn't a robber or a mad scientist. This was a space parasite with dietary preferences. Then Marvel quietly added a detail that changed the vibe completely. The symbiote doesn't actually want brains, it wants a chemical found in brains. The symbiote needs phenethylamine, a compound linked to mood and neurological function, so he can stay stable and healthy. Human brains happen to be rich in it, which explains the whole I want to eat your brain thing without making Venom a full-time cannibal. But here's the twist. That same chemical is found in large amounts in chocolate, and we're talking about regular, normal, convenience store chocolate. So instead of hunting civilians, Eddie Brock can literally keep the symbiote satisfied with candy bars. This turns Venom from a horror monster into something way funnier, so instead of stalking alleys looking for brains, he's raiding gas stations for chocolate. If Eddie doesn't keep the supply up, the symbiote starts getting aggressive and hungry. On one hand, it is a clever retcon. It gives a scientific-ish explanation for the brain-eating obsession without making Venom irredeemable. On the other hand, it makes the character way less intimidating once you know the secret. This terrifying alien life form that can overpower Spider-Man can be pacified with a Hershey's bar. That's a wild trade-off. Dazzler's weakness is absolute silence. Dazzler can convert sound into light, concert noise becomes lasers, city traffic becomes blinding flashes, explosions become raw energy blasts. She's basically a walking wave cannon when the environment is loud. So here's the catch. She doesn't generate power, she borrows it. Dazzler isn't storing energy inside herself. She's a converter. No sound coming in, no power going out. In a perfectly silent room, a vacuum, or a soundproof environment, she's just a woman in a sparky outfit with great hair. No beams, no flashes, no light show. Total silence is her kryptonite. If someone traps Dazzler in a noise-cancelled chamber or uses soundproof tech, her entire offense shuts off. She can't even make a tiny light spark without an external sound source. That's why she's often shown carrying portable music players into battle, because it is fuel for her mutation. Headphones are tactical gear here. The louder the environment, the stronger she gets. At a rock concert, she's borderline unstoppable. In a noisy city street, heavy hitter. In a quiet hallway, almost useless. In a library, don't even bother putting her on the team roster. Marvel and DC both own the rights to the same character. For decades, Marvel Comics and DC Comics have been rivals, but every now and then, they actually come together and do something wild. One of the coolest examples of that is when they collaborate to create the Amalgam Universe, a crossover where both worlds merged into one. Heroes and villains were combined into brand new characters. It was chaotic, creative, and honestly, one of the most unique experiments in comic history. To make this crossover work without completely breaking both universes, they introduced a very specific character, Access. And here's where things get interesting. Access isn't owned by just one company. Both Marvel and DC share the rights to him. That's extremely rare, especially considering how protective both companies are of their characters. Access was designed specifically to act as a bridge between the two universes, making sure everything stayed somewhat stable even when reality itself was collapsing. In this story, Access is responsible for keeping the Marvel and DC universes separate after they were split again. These two realities are represented by powerful cosmic beings, often referred to as the Brothers. And if Access fails in his role, the universes would merge again into the Amalgam Universe. Basically, he's the only thing standing between two entire fictional realities crashing into each other again. Access isn't just a character inside the story. He represents the balance between two real-world companies that usually compete with each other. The fact that both Marvel and DC co-own him shows just how special that crossover era was. Mole Man and Flashlights. Mole Man rules an underground empire. He commands giant monsters, advanced subterranean tech, and an entire civilization beneath the Earth's surface. The guy is basically the king of the underworld in the most literal sense. But bring him to the surface with decent lightning and he's cooked. After spending years in pitch black tunnels, Mole Man's eyes adapted to see perfectly in darkness. That sounds cool until you realize what that means for bright light. His vision became hypersensitive. Sunlight, spotlights, even strong flashlights cause him real pain. While he's got monsters and machinery, all you really need is a bright beam aimed at his face. And suddenly the ruler of Subterranea is stumbling around like someone who just woke up at 3 AM and turned on the bathroom light. That's why whenever Mole Man comes to the surface, he has to wear heavy, dark goggles just to function. Without them, he can barely keep his eyes open. Black Cat's bad luck spills onto loved ones. Around enemies, Black Cat's power are incredible. Guns jam, floors collapse, people trip at the worst moment. But the problem is that bad luck doesn't come with a targeting system. Felicia's Jinx field eventually starts affecting the people close to her. Teammates and partners and boyfriends. If she spends too much time around someone, weird accidents start happening to them. Equipment failures, random mishaps, freak about timing. It's like her presence bends probability in a messy radius, not a clean line toward enemies. And it gets worse the closer she gets emotionally. When she's around Spider-Man, his life gets even more chaotic than usual, and Peter Parker already lives in a permanent bad luck mode. Add Felicia's aura on top, and suddenly things go from Parker luck to cartoon-level disasters. It's not intentional, yes, it's just collateral probability damage. She becomes a walking hazard to the people she cares about. She doesn't control this, it is passive and always on, which means she can safely be close to people without worrying that the ceiling might randomly collapse on them. Team-ups become risky, relationships become dangerous, and love literally increases the odds that something stupid and painful happens to you. Thanos' weakness is subconscious self-sabotage. Thanos can lose because deep down, he doesn't believe he deserves to win. This isn't a fan theory. It's called out directly by Adam Warlock during the Infinity Gauntlet saga. Warlock straight up says, Thanos leaves tiny flaws in his plans on purpose. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. We're talking about a guy who can control reality at a cosmic level, but forgets basic things. Leaves the gauntlet unattended, builds plans with weird backdoors, designs scenarios where heroes have just enough of a chance to pull off a miracle. It's like watching a chess grandmaster intentionally blunder a piece in the endgame. These aren't tactical errors, they are psychological ones. And a lot of this ties back to Thanos' bizarre devotion to death. He doesn't actually want peace or order or balance. He wants to impress death. He wants the drama, the spectacle, the struggle. A quiet, empty universe where he actually wins, that gives him nothing. No validation, no applause, and no cosmic audience. He needs the fight more than he needs the victory. Winning means the game is over. The chaos stops, the purpose disappears. Thanos claims he wants a silent universe, but subconsciously he is terrified of it. So he engineers situations where heroes can challenge him, push him, maybe even beat him. It's like he is addicted to being the villain in a story rather than the ruler of reality. So he doesn't sabotage his plans because he is careless, he sabotages them because he needs to. Black Bolt's weakness is making a sound in his sleep. Black Bolt's voice isn't just loud, it is a conduit for massive destructive energy. A whisper can level buildings. A word can shatter mountains. A scream could erase a city. Because of this, he lives in permanent silence, communicating through sign language or through his telepathic queen, Merusa. Now imagine trying to sleep with that problem. Most people mumble, sigh, snore, or talk in their sleep without even knowing it. For Black Bolt, that's not harmless. A tiny, involuntary sound, while he's unconscious, could be catastrophic. A sleepy exhale with too much vibration could level a wing of the palace. He can't afford to relax, ever. Black Bolt literally sleeps in specially designed soundproof chambers, not for comfort, just for safety. These rooms are built like containment vaults, so that if he accidentally makes noise, the damage is absorbed before it reaches anyone else. And he undergoes extreme mental disciplines to control even subconscious vocalizations. Think about that. The king of the Inhumans has to train his mind, not just for battle, not just for leadership, but to make sure he doesn't accidentally snore. Because a snore, apparently, is a weapon of mass destruction. And that's a level of anxiety most characters don't have to deal with. Iska the Unbeaten's weakness is winning, no matter what. This character has one of the most busted mutant powers ever written. She cannot lose. Not very hard to beat, not extremely skilled. The universe itself bends to make sure she wins. Reality rewrites outcomes so that Iska comes out on top every single time. Sounds god-tier to you, but it's actually a curse. Here's the catch. Iska doesn't control how she wins. Her power doesn't care about loyalty, friendship, or what side she's on. It only cares about the outcome. If she's fighting for a cause that starts to mathematically look like it might fail, battle, her power will force her to switch sides to the one that's going to win. Not by choice, not by betrayal, but by biological compulsion. Her body will literally betray her beliefs to maintain the record. This isn't just battlefield stuff. She can't lose a bet, can't throw a game of cards for fun, and can't let someone else win to be nice. Imagine living a life where you are basically incapable of letting anyone else have a moment. I mean, that sounds cool, but still, winning stops being fun when you are not allowed to lose. During the Arako and Krakoa conflicts, there are moments where Eska switches sides mid-conflict because her power senses the odds shifting. There's even a point where her presence alone demoralizes her team, because if Eska joins the enemy, it means defeat is inevitable. She becomes a walking omen of failure for the people she cares about. Iron Man once had rocket roller skates. One of the strangest and most overlooked features of Iron Man's early armor was the inclusion of rocket-powered roller skates. This unusual gadget appeared in the early days of the character, and at the time, Tony Stark proudly presented the idea as a cutting-edge military innovation, even suggesting that soldiers could one day use rocket skates to move quickly across the battlefield. For a character known for advanced technology, the idea sounded impressive in theory, though it was also a little ridiculous. The roller skates were built directly into Iron Man's armor and powered by small rockets, allowing Tony to zip across the ground at high speeds. This was before many of the iconic features of the armor had fully developed, so the skates were meant to provide quick mobility when flight wasn't being used. Iron Man occasionally used them to move around during missions or demonstrations, and the concept was treated seriously in the early comics, with characters reacting as if it were a revolutionary invention. As the iron armor evolved and gained repulsor-powered flight and far more advanced propulsion system, the roller skates quickly became unnecessary. Flying was faster, more versatile, and far less awkward than skating across the ground in powered armor. Because of this, the feature gradually disappeared from the character's arsenal. Magneto can control minds with his magnetic personality. Magneto is the master of magnetism, capable of controlling metal, generating powerful force fields, and manipulating electromagnetic fields on a massive scale. However, in the early years of the X-Men comics, Marvel occasionally experimented with some strange extensions of his powers before they were fully defined. One of the oddest examples appeared in X-Men 18, where Magneto briefly displayed the ability to influence people's minds using his so-called magnetic personality. One of the oddest examples is where Magneto, in the story, he suggests that his powerful presence and magnetic attraction allow him to dominate the will of others, essentially giving him a form of mind control. The explanation was clearly more of a pun than a scientific idea, playing on the phrase magnetic personality. Unlike his usual powers, which are tied to magnetism and electromagnetic energy, this ability resembled telepathy, something already strongly associated with characters like Professor X. And obviously later writers abandoned the concept, and Magneto's mind-controlling charisma was quietly forgotten as his powers became more clearly defined. The sacrifice of Jean Grey. The story begins when Jean gains an incredible amount of power through the Phoenix Force. At first, the power seems like a blessing. Jean becomes stronger than ever and is capable of feats that few beings in Marvel history could even imagine. Her fellow X-Men are amazed by what she can do, and for a while, it feels like she has become the ultimate hero. The problem was that nobody truly understood the scale of the power she was carrying. The Phoenix Force was far beyond anything a human mind was meant to control, and over time, that power started affecting Jean in dangerous ways. As the story progresses, Jean slowly transforms into Dark Phoenix. Her emotions become more unstable, her judgment becomes clouded, and the immense power at her fingertips starts pushing her further away from the person she once was. Eventually, the situation spirals completely out of control, and the Dark Phoenix consumes an entire star to satisfy her hunger for energy. The destruction of that star wipes out a nearby inhabited planet, killing billions of innocent lives. Suddenly, this is no longer a story about a hero struggling with power. The fate of entire worlds is now at stake, and the universe begins viewing Jean as one of the greatest threats it has ever faced. The surviving X-Men never stop believing that their friends is still somewhere beneath Dark Phoenix persona. They fight to protect her, while powerful alien empires demand justice for the countless lives that were lost. During the final confrontation, Jean briefly regains control and finally understands the full danger she represents. She realizes that as long as the Phoenix Force remains connected to her, there is always a chance that she could lose control again. No prison could hold her, and no one could guarantee that another disaster wouldn't happen. Faced with that reality, Jean makes an incredibly painful decision. Rather than risk billions more deaths in the future, she chooses to end her own life. Jean's death became one of the most iconic moments in Marvel Comics because it was completely driven by her own choice. Nobody forced her to do it. Nobody defeated her. She understood the consequences of her power better than anyone else and accepted the responsibility that came with it. By sacrificing herself, she prevented the Dark Phoenix from ever threatening the universe again. and protected countless worlds from a danger that few beings could have stopped. The ending is tragic because the X-Men lose one of their closest friends, but it is also kind of heroic because Jean spends her final moments saving people she will never met. Decades later, the Dark Phoenix saga is still considered one of Marvel's greatest stories, and Jean's sacrifice remains one of the most powerful acts of heroism in comic book history. The sacrifice of Colossus. The Legacy Virus was one of the deadliest threats the X-Men had ever faced. Unlike villains such as Magneto, Apocalypse, or Sentinels, this was an enemy that couldn't be defeated in a fight. The virus specifically targeted mutants, spreading fear throughout the entire mutant community and slowly killing its victims. For years, the X-Men searched desperately for a cure while watching friends and loved ones suffer. Among the virus's most tragic victims was Illyana Rasputin, the younger sister of Colossus. Her death devastated him and left a wound that never fully healed. Every new victim reminded him of what his family had already lost, making the Legacy Virus a deeply personal battle for him. Eventually, hope appeared. Using research left behind by Moira McTaggart, Beast finally managed to develop a cure. The breakthrough should have been a cause for celebration, but there was a terrible catch. The cure could only be distributed worldwide if an affected mutant administered it and died in the process. Their death would trigger the reaction needed to release the cure into the atmosphere and save mutant kind. Beast couldn't accept such a price. After spending years trying to save lives, he refused to knowingly sacrifice one mutant to save the others. Unable to live with that decision, he abandoned the cure and began searching for another solution, hoping to find a way that wouldn't require anyone to die. When Colossus learned the truth, he saw the situation differently. He had already watched his sister die because of the Legacy Virus, and he couldn't bear the thought of more families suffering the same loss. Unlike Beast, Colossus believed the cost was worth paying if it meant ending the disease forever. Without seeking permission from anyone, he secretly took the cure and injected himself. Knowing exactly what would happen, he activated his mutant powers and transformed into his organic seal form, triggering the reaction needed to release the cure across the globe. In that moment, Colossus not only gave up his own life, so millions of mutants could have a future free from fear and disease. Colossus' death immediately became one of the most emotional moments in X-Men history. His sacrifice wasn't about defeating a supervillain or saving the world during a giant battle. It was a deeply personal decision made out of compassion and love for others. He chose to carry a burden nobody else wanted to carry and paid the ultimate price to spare countless lives. Although later stories revealed that Colossus had survived and been secretly taken by the alien Horde, the impact of the original moment remains unchanged. Sinister breeding pits. Nathaniel Essex, better known as Mr. Sinister, is a geneticist obsessed with mutant DNA and evolution. For over a century, he had conducted experiments in secret laboratories, constantly searching for the perfect genetic combination that could produce the ultimate mutant. Sinister isn't interested in helping mutants or humanity. His obsession is purely scientific and egotistical. He views living beings as nothing more than genetic material that can be manipulated. This mindset led him to create the breeding pits. They are basically massive, underground facilities where mutants were forced into genetic experiments designed to produce powerful offspring. Instead of simply studying DNA in a lab, he forced mutants to reproduce under controlled conditions so he could analyze the results. Mutants captured by Sinister were imprisoned inside these facilities and used as living breeding stock. Their genetic traits were carefully tracked, cataloged, and manipulated in order to produce children with specific abilities. One of Sinister's biggest obsessions is the Summers bloodline, especially the genetic combination of Cyclops and Jean Grey. He believed their DNA held the key to creating an extremely powerful mutant, so Sinister spent years manipulating events behind the scenes to ensure their bloodlines continued. His experiments and breeding programs were designed to eventually produce mutants like Cable and Nate Grey. In other words, some of the most powerful mutants in Marvel history exist partly because Sinister spent decades secretly manipulating genetics through his breeding experiments. He often grew clones in tanks, altered DNA, or experimented on mutant children to see how their powers developed. The Hound program. It was created by the US government as part of its growing efforts to control and eliminate mutants. Instead of relying only on sentinels or military forces, the program explored a darker idea: turn mutants into weapons that hunt their own kind. The project operated under heavy secrecy. In some versions of the story, the research was hidden behind fake government programs, sometimes even disguised as harmless scientific studies like agriculture disease research. Behind that cover, however, the government was experimenting on captured mutants mutants, trying to transform them into specialized trackers capable of locating other mutants anywhere in the world. And the result was the creation of the Hounds. The mutants chosen for the program were usually abducted or imprisoned before being taken to secret laboratories. Once inside the program, they were subjected to intense conditioning and genetic experimentation designed to reshape them into obedient hunters. Their minds were systematically broken down. Through brainwashing and psychological manipulation, their memories and personal identities were suppressed until they no longer resisted their handlers. Many were forced to wear control collars or restraints, reinforcing the idea that they were no longer people but tools. By the time the process was complete, these mutants had been stripped of their free will and reprogrammed to follow orders without question. The program didn't stop at brainwashing. Scientists also experimented with genetic modification to enhance the Hound's ability to track and capture other mutants. Some Hounds were altered to gain special abilities specifically suited for hunting. When a target was located, the Hounds would lead soldiers or sentinels to capture or eliminate the mutants. In some cases, they were accompanied by scout drones and sentinel robots, turning them into part of a much larger anti-mutant hunting system. In many ways, the program represents the worst possible outcome of fear and prejudice. Instead of trying to understand mutants, the authorities chose to break them and weaponize them, creating hunters who had no choice but to serve the very system that enslaved them. The Great Depression. It was a brutal economic collapse that defined the 1930s. Millions lost their jobs, families were evicted, and entire cities struggled to survive. Marvel treats this era as more than a historical backdrop. It uses the Depression to show what life was like before superheroes existed. Poverty, homelessness, factory shutdowns, and soup kitchen lines appear across multiple flashbacks. Instead of glamorizing the time period, Marvel shows how everyday people fought to keep their dignity in a world that offered them almost nothing. The most famous Marvel connection to the Depression is Steve Rogers' origin. Before he became Captain America, Steve grew up in a tiny Brooklyn apartment with a sick mother and barely any money. His frail body and stubborn determination come straight from Depression-era survival. He learned compassion and bravery from watching neighbors support each other when no one else would. Wolverine also crosses paths with the Great Depression, especially in Marvel's War. Logan wanders through America during the post-years of the crisis, encountering gangs, bootleggers, corrupt sheriffs, and displaced families riding freight trains in search of work. These stories capture the hopelessness and lawlessness of the era. Logan often steps in to protect people who have nothing left to lose. One of the most creative uses of the Depression comes from Marvel Noir, a line that reimagines heroes in darker, more grounded versions of the 1930s. Spider-Man becomes a vigilante fighting corrupt politicians and mobsters who exploit the unemployed. Daredevil becomes a detective navigating the shadows of a collapsing New York. X-Men Noir portrays mutants as marginalized outcasts in a society already on the edge. These stories use the Depression to create a gritty atmosphere where crime, corruption, and survival define everyday life. No superpowers needed. And Marvel also shows how the Depression changed the world beyond the 1930s. Characters who lived through it, like Steve Rogers, Logan, and Nick Fury, develop lifelong habits, like distrust of authority and a deep understanding of suffering. The Depression also explains why so many Marvel villains turn to crime, because that era normalized desperation, and some characters never escaped that mindset. And by tying heroes and villains alike to the Great Depression, Marvel adds some emotional weight and realism to their histories. What is Annihilation, and how did it come to magically inhabit a golden mask? Unlike characters such as Apocalypse, Null, or Mephisto, Marvel never gave Annihilation a clear origin story. The entity first appeared as the force behind the demonic armies of Ament. From the beginning, Annihilation was treated less like a traditional character and more like an ancient nightmare. It had no known species, no true name, no physical description, and no explanation for where it came from. Even the characters who fought against it seemed to know almost nothing about its nature beyond the destruction it left behind. The strangest part of the mystery is the Golden Mask. According to the few clues Marvel has provided, Annihilation once possessed a physical form in the distant past. At some point, it allowed the creatures it created to feed upon its body over thousands of years until nothing remained except its spirit. Somehow that spirit survived and became bound to the helm of Ament. Marvel never explains how this process occurred or who created the helmet in the first place. Nobody knows whether the mask was a prison, a vessel, a weapon, or part of Annihilation's own plan. The transformation from a living entity into a haunted artifact remains completely unexplained. explained. What makes the mystery even deeper is the question of what annihilation actually is. Various stories describe it in ways that point in different directions. Sometimes it appears godlike, ruling over entire armies and shaping the fate of dimensions. Other times, it resembles a demonic entity or a parasitic consciousness that survives by possessing hosts. The mask grants its wearer control over the hordes of Amend, but it also gradually consumes and corrupts them. This suggests annihilation is more than a simple spirit trapped inside an object. Its influence extends across an entire realm, and its connection to demons of Amend predates recorded history. Yet Marvel has never classified it within any established cosmic or supernatural category. Was it a god that lost its body, a primordial demon from before recorded history, the living embodiment of destruction itself? Why did it end up inside the Golden Mask, and was that imprisonment intentional or accidental? Even after its major role in X of Swords and later X-Men stories, the most important details remain hidden. That time, Nightcrawler became the Uncanny Spider-Man. After being manipulated by Orchis into carrying out assassinations, Nightcrawler found himself burdened with the need to clear his name and make up for the lives taken through him. So Kurt decided to disappear into the shadows of New York City and start helping ordinary people as a street-level hero. The timing could hardly have been worse. Orchis had just launched its devastation attack on Krakoa during the third Hellfire Gala, leaving mutants dead, missing, or scattered across the world, with mutant kind in hiding, and Kurt unable to operate openly as Nightcrawler. He needed a new identity. Luckily, his old friend Spider-Man had a spare costume available. Wearing a modified Spider-Man suit, Kurt became a strange, new web-themed vigilante operating mainly around Central Park. He jokingly called himself Spider-Man, while the series itself presented him as the Uncanny Spider-Man, and honestly, the identity fit him surprisingly well. Nightcrawler already had the agility, acrobatics, wall-crawling ability, and playful personality needed to look completely natural in a Spider-Man costume, while his teleportation gave the whole act its own spooky little twist. He could vanish in a cloud of smoke, appear behind criminals, crack a joke, and disappear again before anyone understood what had happened. New Yorkers quickly became fascinated by this mysterious blue Spider-Man-like hero, and Kurt finally had a way to protect people while hiding in plain sight. Of course, being a Spider-Man in New York means your peaceful new career lasts about 5 minutes. Kurt soon became a target of Silver Sable and the Wild Pack, although his relationship with Sable became much more personal and eventually romantic. Orchis also continued haunting him, throwing threats like Rhino into his path, and working with Vulture, who had become involved in their Hound program. Vulture used mind control mutants, used Cloak, Dagger, and Feral against Kurt, forcing him to fight people who were victims of Orchis themselves. So beneath the colorful costume and playful superhero identity, Kurt's story stayed deeply connected to the larger mutant crisis. He was trying to be a friendly neighborhood hero during one of the darkest periods mutant kind had ever faced. The Uncanny Spider-Man era also became incredibly personal when Kurt discovered a confused and injured Mystique, who had suffered a stroke during the Hellfire Gala attack. As she slowly recovered, long-buried secrets surrounding Kurt's family finally came into the open, including major revelations about his parentage. Eventually, Kurt put the Spider-Man identity aside and returned to being Nightcrawler, rejoining the X-Men in their war against Orchis and helping attack their facilities while fighting for mutant kind survival. So his time as the Uncanny Spider-Man was relatively short, but it gave Nightcrawler one of the most naturally fitting temporary identities in Marvel history. For a brief period, Peter Parker basically handed a Spider-Man suit to a teleporting blue demon-looking mutant with a sword, and somehow it worked perfectly. The sacrifice of Wolverine. For most of Marvel history, Wolverine's healing factor allowed him to survive injuries that would instantly kill almost anyone else. Gunshots, explosions, stabbings, poison, it didn't matter. Logan always healed and kept fighting. That changed during Death of Wolverine, when a virus completely shut down his healing factor. For the first time in decades, Wolverine was mortal. Every wound now mattered, and every fight carried real consequences. And while trying to understand what had happened to him, Logan discovered that a bounty had been placed on his head. Criminals, assassins, and old enemies began haunting him, sensing an opportunity to finally kill the man who had survived everything. As Wolverine followed the trail behind the bounty, it eventually led him to Paradise Valley, a secret facility connected to one of the darkest chapters of his life. There, he encountered Dr. Abraham Cornelius, one of the scientists responsible for the Weapon X experiment that bonded adamantium to his skeleton years earlier. Cornelius had become obsessed with recreating the process and was using innocent people as test subjects. objects. His goal was to create a new generation of controllable super soldiers. When he discovered that Logan no longer possessed his healing factor, he became furious. The one thing he wanted most was gone, and in his desperation, he prepared to force the adamantium bounding procedure on two innocent captives. Wolverine immediately realized there was no time to waste. If Cornelius succeeded, more lives would be destroyed just as his own had been all those years ago. During the struggle, Logan made a decision that would cost him everything. He slashed open the containment tank holding the molten adamantium, causing the liquid metal to pour into the facility. The axe prevented the experiment from being completed and protected the innocent prisoners, but it came at a terrible price. The molten adamantium engulfed Logan's body, burning him alive as it slowly hardened around him. Even while suffering unimaginable pain, he continued fighting long enough to ensure Cornelius was stopped for good. With the threat eliminated and the captives safe, Logan's body became trapped inside the shell of solid adamantium. Without his healing factor, there was no way to survive what had happened. In his final moments, he stood frozen beneath the hardening metal while looking out toward the horizon. It was a surprisingly peaceful ending for a character who had spent most of his life surrounded by violence and tragedy. Wolverine didn't die trying to conquer an enemy or win a war. He died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. By sacrificing his own life, he prevented others from suffering the same fate that had haunted him since the Weapon X program. That time, Mary Franklin pretended to be Peter Parker. When Peter stepped away from being Spider-Man for an extended period, New York suddenly found itself with a very familiar-looking replacement swinging around the city. The new Spider-Man wore a costume clearly inspired by Peter's classic look, fought criminals, and seemed determined to keep his legacy alive while he was gone. The surprise was that the person under the mask was actually Martha Franklin, a teenage girl and obsessive Spider-Man fan who had decided to take up his role herself. Mary also happened to have a personal connection to Peter's world through her family. Her father was a wealthy businessman, Jerry Franklin, and she was related to J. Jonah Jameson. So while Peter was enjoying his very temporary retirement, a teenager with superpowers basically looked at the empty Spider-Man position and decided she was qualified for the job. Mary already had genuine powers by this point, gained after secretly taking part in the mystical Gathering of Five ceremony in place of her father. The ritual granted her extraordinary abilities, including superhuman strength, speed, agility, durability, and flight, giving her more than enough power to survive on the streets. Once Spider-Man disappeared from public view, she began fighting crime in his name and created her own version of his costume. Her outfit had the same red and blue Spider-Man theme, but with a rougher homemade appearance and a large spider symbol across the chest. She was not officially chosen by Peter, and there was no grand ceremony where he passed her the mantle. Matty simply saw that Spider-Man was gone, loved what he represented, and decided New York still needed someone wearing the mask. Things became awkward when the real Spider-Man eventually returned and discovered that someone had been running around using his identity. Mary's admiration for Peter was already intense, and over time, it developed into a serious crush that Peter absolutely did not return. At one point, after MJ was believed dead, Mary even kissed Peter while he was performing CPR on her following a battle, leading him to firmly reject her advances because of their significant age difference and because he still believed MJ was alive. Thankfully, Mary's career soon moved in a healthier direction. After becoming involved in a conflict with Charlotte Witter, she took on a new identity as Spider-Woman with the blessing of Jessica Drew, and eventually developed her own costumes and place within Marvel's growing Spider family. Sadly, years later, she was drugged, kidnapped, and exploited before being rescued by Jessica Jones, after which she entered counseling and tried to rebuild her life. But during the events surrounding the Karvinoff family's campaign against Spider-Man and his allies, Mary was captured and murdered as part of their ritual, so her time actually wearing the Spider-Man identity was brief. For a little while, Spider-Man retired, and an intensely devoted teenage fan simply made herself a costume, took over his patrol route, and became New York's new web-themed hero. That time, Deadpool pretended to be Peter Parker. Deadpool's brief career as Spider-Man happened in Deadpool Annual Issue 2, during a story involving the Chameleon. At the beginning, Spider-Man explains to Wade that fighting Chameleon is always a nightmare, because the villain can disguise himself as basically anyone, meaning Peter has developed the unfortunate habit of getting stabbed by people he thought he could trust. When the pair finally track Chameleon down, things go badly fast. The villain injects Spider-Man with a serum that leaves him severely weakened and unable to continue the chase. Wade then comes up with a plan. If Chameleon wins by pretending to be other people, Deadpool will simply beat him at his own game. So Wade swaps costumes with Peter, pulls on the Spider-Man suit, and heads back into New York as the new Spidey. The funniest part is watching Deadpool discover that being Spider-Man comes with a completely different set of rules. While searching for Chameleon, he spots a woman being mugged in an alley and quickly takes down the criminal. Then Wade realizes he has a small problem. Spider-Man is supposed to leave criminals alive for the police. Deadpool is much more familiar with the convenient simplicity of not having to hand over living bad guys afterward. So he improvises by wrapping the mugger up and attaching him to the back of a moving police car, which is technically closer to Spider-Man's method if you are feeling extremely generous. Wade keeps trying to act like his idea of a friendly neighborhood hero, but everything comes out slightly wrong. He has the costume, the jokes, and the general enthusiasm, yet the actual judgment of Peter Parker is nowhere to be found. Then Deadpool encounters a villain called the Master with 3 S's, who controls snakes, of course, and soon gets transformed into a giant mouse after a bizarre energy accident. Wade charges into the situation, and the fight eventually escalates to the point where he swings a helicopter at the enormous creature. So within a very short time of borrowing Peter's costume, Deadpool has already turned a normal Spider-Man patrol into the kind of event that probably causes insurance companies to quietly leave New York forever. Chameleon eventually arrives and injects Wade with the same weakening serum used on Peter. Then Peter shows up wearing Deadpool's costume, while Chameleon also disguises himself as Deadpool, leaving a dizzy and drugged Wade staring at 2 identical versions of himself and trying to figure out which one is his actual friend. Somehow, against all reasonable expectations, he chooses correctly, and the perfect ending comes after Peter and Wade admit that their bizarre little team-up actually worked. Peter then picks up a newspaper and discovers something far more painful than any punch from Chameleon. Deadpool Spider-Man received positive coverage in the Daily Bugle. The headline reads, "Hope for Spider-Man," meaning J. Jonah Jameson finally approved of the web slinger during the one occasion when the man inside the costume was not Peter Parker. Wade had been more violent, less careful, and dramatically worse at normal superhero procedure, yet somehow he still improved Spider-Man's public image. For Peter, that might genuinely be the most insulting part of the entire adventure. Deadpool's borrowed his suit for one day, nearly turned crime fighting into a public safety emergency, swung a helicopter at a giant mouse, and walked away with better press than the real Spider-Man. Before Thor became one of Marvel's greatest heroes, he honestly wasn't someone you'd want truly in Asgard. He was incredibly proud, loved showing off his strength, and always believed he knew better than everyone else. The biggest turning point came when Odin specifically warned him not to confront the frost giants in Jotunheim. Thor ignored that warning anyway, marched straight into enemy territory, and started a massive conflict that could have been thrown the 9 realms into war. Odin wasn't just angry because his son had disobeyed him. He saw the future king of Asgard, acting like an impulsive warrior who cared more about glory than the lives of everyone around him. If Thor kept heading down that path, the entire kingdom could eventually pay the price. So Odin came up with a punishment that completely changed Thor's life. Instead of locking him in a prison or taking away Mjolnir for a few weeks, Odin stripped away almost everything that made Thor who he was. His memories disappeared, his powers vanished, even his identity was gone. Thor woke up on Earth believing he was an ordinary human named Donald Blake. He had no memories of Asgard, no idea he had ever been the god of thunder, and no reason to think his life had ever been any different. Odin even gave Donald Blake a badly injured leg that forced him to walk with a cane every single day. For the first time in his existence, Thor experienced pain, weakness, and the everyday struggles of ordinary people. Years passed, and Donald Blake built an entirely new life as a doctor, spending his days helping patients without realizing he had once commanded lightning and battled monsters across the cosmos. Eventually, Odin's plan reached its final stage. While traveling through Norway, Donald Blake found himself trapped inside the cave during an alien invasion. With danger closing in and nowhere left to run, he grabbed his wooden walking cane and struck it against a rock. In an instant, the cane transformed into Mjolnir. Lightning exploded around him, and every memory came rushing back. Donald Blake remembered he was Thor, the god of thunder, and transformed back into the powerful hero fans know today. Odin believed the lesson had finally worked. Thor had spent years living as a vulnerable human, helping others without expecting praise or glory. He had finally become worthy of wielding Mjolnir once again. Years later, Marvel added one detail that made this whole story far more disturbing than it originally seemed. Blake wasn't simply a disguise or a fake identity living inside Thor's head. Odin had actually created Donald Blake as a real person with his own soul. thoughts, and emotions. Whenever Thor existed, Blake was trapped in a strange, dreamlike world, unable to live his own life. Then he eventually learned the truth: his childhood and career as a doctor, his disability, his memories, and every relationship he ever built had all been created by Odin as part of a lesson for someone else. Blake completely snapped after learning the truth and escaped, filled with rage toward the gods, who had treated his entire life like a teaching exercise. Looking back, Odin's punishment wasn't only hard on Thor, it accidentally created another victim, whose whole life was built on a lie. Deadpool is famous for surviving absolutely everything. He gets blown up, cut in half, shot, stabbed, and somehow always pops back up with another joke. Most people look at that and think, I'd love to have powers like that. But the comics reveal a much darker reason behind it. It all starts with one of the weirdest love triangles in Marvel history. In comics, Death isn't just an idea or a force of nature, she's an actual cosmic being who can appear as a beautiful woman. Thanos became completely obsessed with winning her love, spending centuries trying to impress her with bigger and bigger acts of destruction. The problem was that Death wasn't interested in him. Instead, she formed a genuine bond with Wade Wilson. Because Deadpool constantly hovered between life and death, thanks to his healing factor, he crossed paths with her over and over again, and the two eventually developed real feelings for each other. When Thanos realized what was happening, he absolutely lost it. Thanos spent his entire existence trying to impress Lady Death, only to watch her fall for the loudest, most chaotic guy in the universe. Thanos could have killed Deadpool out of jealousy, but that would have given Wade exactly what he wanted. Death and Deadpool would finally get to be together forever. So Thanos came up with a punishment. Using powerful cosmic magic, he placed a curse on Wade that made him completely immortal. Deadpool already healed from injuries incredibly fast, but this curse pushed things to another level. No matter what happens to his body, his soul could never leave it. Even total destruction couldn't free him. Thanos had basically slammed the door to the afterlife shut and thrown away the key. That punishment became even more painful because of Deadpool's condition. Wade's body is constantly at war with itself. His healing factor keeps him alive, while his aggressive cancer keeps attacking him every second of every day. The result is endless physical pain that never truly goes away. Deep down, there were moments when Wade actually wanted peace. He wanted the chance to finally rest and be reunited with the one person who genuinely loved him. Thanos made sure that could never happen. Every time Deadpool came close to death, the curse dragged him right back. Every explosion, every fatal injury, and every near-death experience ended exactly the same way. He survived whether he wanted to or not. Yes, immortality sounds like the ultimate superpower until you realize why Deadpool was given it. It wasn't a reward, it wasn't even meant to make him stronger. It existed for one reason: to keep him separated from the love of his life forever. Every extra day Wade stayed alive was another victory for Thanos, and another reminder that someone else had complete control over his fate. What if Bruce Banner could stay in control while transformed into the Hulk? Instead of constantly switching between a genius scientist and a raging monster, why not combine both? The idea wasn't completely new either. Marvel actually explored it back in What If issue 2 in 1977. In that issue, Bruce transformed into a giant green Hulk without losing his intelligence. He still had all his scientific knowledge, worked alongside the Avengers, and became one of Earth's greatest heroes. It was a fun alternate universe story, but plenty of readers hoped Marvel would eventually bring the same idea into the main continuity. It was a fun alternate universe story. After all, having Bruce's brilliant mind combined with the Hulk's limitless range sounded like the perfect evolution of the character. And during Peter David's legendary run on The Incredible Hulk, instead of treating Bruce and the Hulk as simply a one-man changing into a monster, Peter David completely redefined how readers understood the character. He explained that Bruce's different Hulk forms represented different pieces of his fractured mind, shaped by years of childhood trauma and abuse. There wasn't just one Hulk living inside Bruce anymore. There was the gentle scientist Bruce Banner, the childlike savage Hulk who carried all of Bruce's anger and fear, and the street smart Grey Hulk, also known as Joe Fixit. Rather than having these personalities constantly fighting for control, Peter David built an entire story around the possibility that they could finally work together. That breakthrough came in The Incredible Hulk issue 377, when Doc Samson used hypnosis to force Bruce's fractured personalities to confront one another. Instead of competing for control, they finally accepted each other and merged into a single, balanced identity. The result became known as Professor Hulk. He looked like the massive green Hulk everyone recognized, but he spoke with Bruce Banner's intelligence and scientific knowledge, while also keeping the confidence and attitude of Joe Fixit. For the first time, fans got exactly what they had imagined for years: a Hulk who could solve scientific problems one minute and smash through buildings the next without losing control of himself. Jumping onto live action, after the events of Infinity War, Bruce stopped trying to get rid of Hulk and decided to embrace him instead. Over many months of gamma experiments, he finally fused his own mind with the Hulk's Hulk's body, creating the version fans now call Smart Hulk. He could discuss advanced science, joke with the Avengers, wear glasses and a sweater, and still possess enough strength to wield the Infinity Gauntlet. That time McGargan became Spider-Man. McGargan's time as Spider-Man came during the Dark Reign era, when Norman Osborn somehow managed to go from being the Green Goblin to becoming one of the most powerful men in the United States. After the Skrull invasion, Osborn was placed in charge of national security and created his own government-backed Avengers team, filling it with villains disguised as famous heroes. Bullseye became Hawkeye, Moonstone became Miss Marvel, and McGargan, who was bonded to the Venom symbiote at the time, was chosen to become the new Spider-Man. Norman gave Mac medication that helped suppress the symbiote's usual monstrous appearance and made it easier to control, allowing Venom to take on a slimmer, cleaner form that looked remarkably close to Peter Parker's classic black Spider-Man costume. And just like that, one of Spider-Man's oldest enemies was officially introduced to the public as their new friendly neighborhood hero. Mac absolutely loved the arrangement, mostly because being an Avenger gave him fame, protection, and permission to behave like a monster while pretending to be one of the good guys. The problem was that putting on Spider-Man's costume did very little to improve his personality. During the Dark Avengers' first major mission against Morgan Le Fay, Mac fell under her magical control and attacked his own teammates, including Ares and Bullseye's fake Hawkeye. At one point, he even tried to eat Bullseye, which naturally created a small amount of tension around the office afterward. And that pretty much sums up Mac's version of Spider-Man. Peter Parker worries about using too much force against criminals. Mac had to be monitored and medicated so he would stop treating people like snacks. Things became even funnier when Mac was assigned to work with Triple J, who had become mayor of New York. Mac still hated Jonah because Jameson had originally played a major role in turning him into the Scorpion years earlier, so being ordered to serve as the mayor's heroic Spider-Man was almost too perfect. Mac quietly set out to make Jonah's life miserable, dropping a dead stripper in his bed and helping engineer a gang war that could destroy his reputation. At the same time, he developed a habit of brutally maiming small-time criminals, sometimes eating their limbs and stealing their money afterward. Mac's career as Spider-Man finally collapsed during Norman Osborn's invasion of Asgard. The Dark Avengers attacked the Asgardians and the heroes who came to defend them, and Mac quickly realized that Norman's entire regime was falling apart. So, in typical Gargan fashion, he decided to enjoy himself by devouring Asgardians while he still had the chance. Eventually, the real Spider-Man and Miss Marvel confronted him and forcibly separated Mac from the Venom symbiote, ending his time as Norman's government-approved web-slinger. He was arrested alongside the rest of the Dark Avengers and later returned to his old identity as the Scorpion. So for one wonderfully cursed period in Marvel history, McGargan went from being a man created to destroy Spider-Man to officially replacing him on the Avengers, wearing his colors, sealing his reputation, and proving that apparently the standards for becoming Spider-Man get surprisingly flexible when Norman runs the government. Speaking of Norman, he also wore the costume, and it happened during the 2025 run of The Amazing Spider-Man. By this point, Norman was living through a very unusual chapter of his life because the supernatural evil that had driven much of his Green Goblin persona had been cleansed from his soul. That left him trying to live with the memories of everything he had done over the years, including the people he hurt, the lives he destroyed, and of course his long horrible history with Peter Parker. Then Peter's battle with the cosmic entity Hellgate ended with Spider-Man trapped far away from Earth in deep space. With Peter gone and New York missing its usual projector, Norman made a decision that would have sounded completely insane during almost any other era of Marvel. He put on Peter Parker's red and blue costume and became the new Spider-Man. Norman's version of Spider-Man naturally had his own little touches. He adjusted the costume around his needs and added extra equipment, including bulkier web shooters around his ankles, giving his Spider-Man a slightly more mechanical and aggressive feel. And Norman generally tried to do the job. He patrolled the city, fought threats, and attempted to follow the heroic standard Peter had spent years building. The awkward part was that basically everyone knew who was under the mask, and nobody had forgotten that this was Norman Osborn. Miles Morales, Silk, and Spider-Gwen confronted him because, from their perspective, the Green Goblin wearing Spider-Man's costume was almost insulting. This was the man responsible for some of the darkest moments in Peter's life, including the death of Gwen Stacy, and now he was swinging around New York, dressed like the hero he had spent decades tormenting. Norman might have wanted redemption, but convincing the Spider family to accept his new career was always going to be slightly harder than updating his LinkedIn profile. His past also came haunting for him through the Goblin Slayers, a force built around people whose lives had been damaged by Norman, and his years as the Green Goblin. Led through figures including Alecto and Roderick Kingsley, better known as the Hobgoblin, they had absolutely no interest in Norman's redemption story. To them, a new costume did not erase decades of suffering, and seeing him celebrated as Spider-Man only made the situation worse. So Norman found himself trapped in a deeply uncomfortable position. He was trying to protect people while being hunted by victims and enemies created through his own actions. Every battle dragged another piece of his history back into the present, and the Spider-Man identity forced him to live under Peter's most famous lesson about great power and great responsibility. For Peter, that philosophy came from failing to stop a criminal before Uncle Ben died. For Norman, the list of regrets was long enough to fill several warehouses. Eventually, Norman's time as Spider-Man came to an end after the escalation conflict with Hobgoblin and the Goblin Slayers pushed him to confront the weight of everything he had done. By The Amazing Spider-Man issue 20, his attempt to carry Peter's mantle had fallen apart, and a badly injured Norman walked away from the red and blue suit. His brief time never magically convinced the world that the Green Goblin had become a good man, and it certainly could not erase the blood attached to his past. Still, that is exactly what makes the whole story so fascinating. Norman Osborn spent decades as one of Spider-Man's greatest enemies, killed Gwen Stacy, ruined Peter's life more times than anyone can reasonably count, and then, when Peter disappeared into space, somehow ended up trying to protect New York in his costume. Spider-Man grows extra arms. In The Amazing Spider-Man, issue 100 to issue 102 in 1971, Peter Parker was having one of his classic existential meltdowns. He was tired of the constant chaos, his best friend Harry Osborn was struggling with drug addiction, Gwen Stacy blamed Spider-Man for her father's death, and Peter just wanted to live a normal life. So being a scientist, he decided to brew up a serum to remove his powers once and for all. You can probably guess how well that went. Peter drinks the serum, falls asleep, and dreams about all the people in his life, including Gwen, telling him he's meant to be Spider-Man. When he wakes up, surprised, the serum didn't cure him. It mutated him even further, sprouting 4 extra arms out of his sides. Suddenly, Spider-Man isn't just your friendly neighborhood hero, he's a full-blown human tarantula. Naturally, Peter freaks out and hides in Dr. Kurt Connor's beach house to find the cure. As if having 6 arms wasn't bad enough, things quickly escalate when a new villain shows up, Morbius, making his first ever appearance. Morbius attacks Spider-Man out of bloodlust, only for the Lizard to show up, because apparently one monster fight wasn't enough. So now you've got a 6-armed Spider-Man, a vampire, and a mutant lizard all brawling in the same room. Classic Marvel chaos. Eventually, Morbius bites the lizard, which weirdly helps Connors regain control over his mind. Using a sample of Morbius' blood, the two manage to reverse Peter's mutation, curing him of his unwanted limbs. The cure works, but not before one of the most bizarre arcs in Spider-Man history wraps up with Peter swearing never to play mad scientist again. Spoiler, he totally does later. Despite how insane it sounds, the 6-armed Spider-Man story is actually pretty beloved today, partly because of how unapologetically weird it is, and partly because it introduced Morbius, who would go on to become a major character in Marvel's supernatural side, not the movie side though. It's one of those WTF Spider-Man moments that perfectly captures the 70s era of comics, dramatic, messy, and gloriously absurd. Now we are going to talk about every power classification in Marvel Comics. Peak Human is where everything begins. These are characters with no superpowers at all. No magic, no mutant genes, no cosmic energy, and no super soldier serum running through their bodies. They are simply people who have pushed themselves to the absolute limit of what a human can achieve in the Marvel Universe. Their strength comes from years of training, incredible discipline, experience, intelligence, and determination. They spend their lives mastering combat, learning countless fighting styles, sharpening their reflexes, improving their aim, and developing skills that make them capable of standing beside gods and monsters. They may not be able to lift cars or shoot lasers, but they are fast enough to dodge bullets, skilled enough to outsmart stronger opponents, and experienced enough to survive battles that most normal people wouldn't last 5 seconds in. What really makes Peak Humans so impressive is how much they rely on preparation and technique. Every weapon they carry, every move they make, and every decision they take is backed by years of practice. Hawkeye can hit targets from unbelievable distances with almost impossible accuracy. Black Widow combines martial arts, acrobatics, stealth, and espionage into one of the deadliest fighting styles on Earth. Shang-Chi has mastered so many forms of combat that even characters with superhuman abilities struggle against him in a fight. Then you have Kingpin, who looks like a giant bodybuilder, but is actually one of the strongest and most intimidating normal humans in Marvel. His size, power, and fighting skill allow him to go toe-to-toe with heroes who are physically superior. Even someone like the Punisher doesn't need powers to be terrifying. His military training, tactical mind, weapon expertise, and willingness to keep fighting no matter the odds make him one of the most dangerous people in the Marvel Universe. Because these characters don't have incredible powers to fall back on, every fight feels more grounded and unpredictable. They have to think ahead, use the environment, exploit weaknesses, and adapt in the middle of combat. They are constantly planning, analyzing, and making split-second decisions because one mistake could easily cost them the fight. That's also why they are often some of the most respected heroes and villains in Marvel. They've all earned their place without relying on supernatural abilities. Their greatest weapon has always been themselves. But eventually, human skill alone reaches its limit, and that's where technology enters the picture. Instead of changing the person, this class changes what they are capable of through machines, engineering, and scientific innovation. These characters are still ordinary people underneath it all, but once they put on their armor or use the equipment they've built, they can suddenly fly across cities, survive explosions, fire energy blasts, or even battle beings, far stronger than any normal human. Their greatest weapon isn't their body, it's their mind. They are inventors, engineers, and visionaries who constantly push technology further than anyone else on Earth. Every upgrade, every new suit, and every gadget is another step toward overcoming obstacles that should be impossible for an ordinary person. The perfect example is Tony Stark. Without the Iron Man armor, he's just a billionaire with an incredible understanding of science and engineering. But the moment he steps inside one of his suits, everything changes. He gains superhuman strength, incredible speed, advanced AI assistance, powerful repulsor weapons, flight, energy shields, and enough firepower to fight aliens, monsters, and even gods. And he's not the only one. War Machine takes the same foundation and turns it into a walking weapons platform packed with missiles, heavy artillery, and military-grade firepower. Pepper Potts' rescue armor focuses more on defense and protection while still giving her abilities that far exceed any normal human. Every suit is different because every inventor builds technology to solve different problems, constantly improving and evolving with every new challenge they face. Unlike natural abilities that usually stay the same, new inventions can always be upgraded, redesigned, or replaced with something even better. That's why Iron Man has created dozens upon dozens of different armors over the years, each built for a specific purpose, whether it's fighting underwater, surviving in space, taking on the Hulk, or dealing with magical threats. Technology gives these characters almost unlimited room to grow because every new idea can become a new weapon, a better defense, or an entirely new way to fight. But technology can only take someone so far though. The next class is where people themselves begin to change. Mutates are ordinary humans who gain extraordinary abilities because of something that happened to them after they were born. Sometimes it's a scientific experiment that goes horribly wrong, sometimes it's a life-changing accident, and other times it's an attempt to create the perfect human. Whatever the cause may be, one thing connects every mutate. They weren't born with these abilities. Their powers were awakened by an outside force that permanently transformed their body, while others completely rewrite a person's biology, turning them into something far beyond what any normal human could ever become. Marvel has created countless ways for someone to become a mutate, and each one comes with its own unique abilities. Spider-Man gained his incredible strength, agility, wall crawling, and spider sense after being bitten by a radioactive spider. Bruce Banner was exposed to massive amounts of gamma radiation, giving birth to the Hulk. Steve Rogers volunteered for the Super Soldier Serum, where the serum transformed him into the physical peak of humanity, creating Captain America. Luke Cage survived an experimental procedure that left him with unbreakable skin and immense strength, while Deadpool's healing factor was artificially activated through the Weapon X program. Even Daredevil can fall into this category, with the radioactive chemicals that blinded him also enhancing his remaining senses to superhuman levels. Every one of these heroes has a completely different story, but they all share the same basic idea. An external event changed their lives forever. Because mutates can gain their powers in so many different ways, this ends up being one of the largest and most diverse classes in Marvel. Mutants are different. They are born carrying a unique genetic trait known as the X gene, which means the potential for their powers has always been part of them. Most mutants don't discover their abilities as children though. Their powers usually awaken during puberty or moments of extreme stress, completely changing the course of their lives. For some, it's an exciting discovery that opens the door to incredible possibilities. For others, it's frightening and impossible to control. One day they might be living a normal life, and the next, they accidentally freeze an entire room, level a building, or discover they can read minds. Every mutant's awakening is different, but it all traces back to the same genetic source. The X gene can manifest in almost limitless ways, which is why mutants are some of the most diverse characters in all of Marvel. Wolverine developed razor-sharp bone claws, enhanced senses, and an incredible healing factor, long before adamantium was ever bonded to his skeleton. Magneto can manipulate magnetic fields on a massive scale, allowing him to control metal, generate force fields, and even influence the planet. Storm commands the weather, creating hurricanes, lightning, and blizzards with incredible precision. Cyclops channels powerful optic blasts through his eyes. Iceman can manipulate ice and moisture at an almost unimaginable level. And Jean Grey possesses powerful telepathic and telekinetic abilities. No true mutants have the exact same powers, because the X gene expresses itself differently in every individual, making each one completely unique. Mutants also represent something much bigger than just another group of superheroes. They are considered the next step in human evolution, often referred to as Homo superior, a new branch of humanity with abilities that normal humans don't possess. Because they are born this way, they've spent decades at the center of one of Marvel's biggest ongoing conflicts. Many people fear them, distrust them, or see them as a threat, simply because of what they are, leading to discrimination, prejudice, and constant battles for acceptance. That's why teams like the X-Men exist, not only to protect the world from dangerous threats, but also to protect a world that often fears and rejects them. Their stories aren't just about incredible powers, they are also about identity, belonging, and finding a place in a world that doesn't always welcome them. After mutants, we come to another group of people who are born with hidden potential, but their story is completely different. Inhumans are descendants of ancient humans who were genetically altered by the alien Kree thousands of years ago as part of a series of experiments. Those changes were passed down through countless generations, remaining completely dormant until the right trigger finally awakens them. That trigger is known as Terrigenesis, a transformation caused by exposure to the Terrigen mist. Once a human enters this process, their body undergoes a dramatic metamorphosis, and when they emerge, their powers have fully manifested. Some gain incredible physical abilities, others develop strange or unbelievably powerful gifts, and in some cases, the transformation can even change their appearance forever. Just like mutants, no two Inhumans are exactly alike. Black Bolt possesses one of the most destructive voices in the Marvel Universe, capable of leveling cities with a single whisper, which is why he spends most of his life in complete silence. Medusa can mentally control every strand of her hair, turning it into a powerful weapon and tool at the same time. Crystal has the rare ability to manipulate all four classical elements: fire, water, earth, and air, making her one of the most versatile members of the Inhuman royal family. Karnak doesn't rely on flashy energy blasts or super strength. Instead, he has an almost supernatural ability to instantly recognize weaknesses and pressure points in virtually anything, whether it's a person, a structure, or even a strategy. Every Terrigenesis is unpredictable, so no one knows exactly what abilities they receive until the transformation is complete. For most of Marvel's history, the Inhumans have remained isolated from the rest of humanity, living in the hidden city of Attilan and following traditions that have existed for generations. Their society is built around Terrigenesis, with the ceremony serving as one of the most important moments in every Inhuman's life because it reveals the powers they've carried within them since birth. The Mystic class takes the Marvel Universe in a completely different direction by introducing magic. These characters draw their power from mystical forces that exist beyond the physical world, allowing them to do things that science simply can't explain. Some spend decades studying ancient spells and forgotten knowledge, while others channel energy from powerful dimensions or call upon ancient entities for strength. Magic in Marvel isn't something that appears overnight. It takes years of discipline, practice, and understanding to master, and even the greatest sorcerers are constantly learning new techniques and uncovering secrets that have been hidden for thousands of years. The poster child here is Doctor Strange. After losing the use of his hands in an accident, his search for healing eventually led him to the Ancient One, where he began studying the mystic arts. Over time, he became one of the most powerful sorcerers on Earth, capable of creating magical shields, opening portals across the universe, manipulating time, protecting reality from supernatural threats, and casting countless spells for almost any situation. Clea draws upon her own mystical heritage while becoming one of Marvel's greatest magic users in her own right. Brother Voodoo combines traditional magic with spiritual rituals, and magic can teleport through limbo while wielding the legendary Soul Sword. Every mystic has their own style, their own spells, and their own way of using magic, which makes this one of the most creative classes in Marvel. A sorcerer, of course, isn't limited to just one ability for controlling fire or reading minds. Depending on their knowledge, experience, and the spells they've mastered, they can perform an enormous variety of feats. One battle might involve creating protective barriers, while the next could involve banishing demons, sealing away dangerous artifacts, traveling between dimensions, or rewriting reality within certain limits. Many of the greatest magical threats in Marvel don't rely on brute strength at all. They rely on knowledge. That's why books like the Darkhold, powerful relics like the Eye of Agamotto, and legendary places such as Kamar Taj play such an important role in the Marvel universe. In the world of magic, knowledge is often the greatest source of power, and those who dedicate their lives to mastering it can stand alongside cosmic beings, gods, and some of the strongest heroes Marvel has ever created. As powerful as magic can be, there are beings in the Marvel Universe who don't need to study ancient spells or spend years learning mystical knowledge. Their incredible abilities are simply part of who they are. This is where the Divine class comes in, made up of gods, goddesses, and other beings whose power comes from their divine nature. These characters are often connected to ancient pantheons, legendary realms, and civilizations that have existed for thousands of years. They naturally possess immense strength, incredible durability, long lifespans, and abilities that place them far beyond ordinary humans. While many people across the universe worship them as gods, they still have personalities, families, rivalries, and flaws just like everyone else. Thor is easily the most famous example of this class. As the god of thunder, he possesses overwhelming strength, can survive attacks that would destroy almost anyone else, and commands lightning with incredible precision. His legendary hammer, Mjolnir, allows him to fly, channel massive amounts of energy, and unleash storms, but even without it, Thor remains one of the strongest beings in Marvel. Above him stands Odin, whose powers has protected Asgard for countless centuries and earned him a reputation as one of the mightiest gods in existence. Zeus rules over the Olympian gods with incredible strength and control over lightning. Hercules combines his legendary courage with unbelievable physical power, while Hela, the goddess of death, commands immense mystical and divine abilities that make her one of Asgard's greatest threats. Every pantheon has its own rulers, warriors, and legends, each bringing their own unique abilities and history into the Marvel Universe. This class shows that Earth isn't the center of everything, and humanity isn't the only civilization with powerful protectors and ancient legends. These divine beings regularly become involved in cosmic wars, conflicts between realms, and battles that can reshape entire worlds. They fight alongside heroes, clash with other gods, challenge cosmic entities, and sometimes even threaten reality. Their stories blend mythology, fantasy, and superhero action together, creating some of the biggest and most unforgettable adventures Marvel has ever told. Beyond gods lies another level of power, one that isn't tied to a single world, a single race, or even a single realm. This is the Cosmic class, where characters draw their abilities from the very forces that shape the universe. These powers exist on an entirely different scale, allowing their users to travel across galaxies, manipulate enormous amounts of energy, survive in the vacuum of space, and they influence events that can affect entire planets, or even much more. Some are born with these cosmic connections, others are chosen by ancient universal forces, and some are transformed after coming into contact with some sources of energy. No matter how they obtain it, cosmic power places these characters among the most influential beings in all of Marvel. The Silver Surfer, originally known as Norrin Radd, he was granted the power cosmic by Galactus and transformed into his herald. That single gift gave him incredible strength, faster than light travel, near invulnerability, energy manipulation, and the ability to explore the universe. Galactus possesses that same power cosmic on an even greater scale, using it to sustain his endless existence as one of the oldest and most powerful beings in creation. Then there's Captain Universe, who is empowered by the mysterious Unipower whenever the universe needs a champion. Quasar channels immense cosmic energy through the quantum bands, allowing him to create solid energy constructs and manipulate powerful forces, while the Phoenix Force stands as one of the oldest and most feared cosmic entities in existence, representing life, death, and rebirth on a universal scale. Every one of these characters uses cosmic power differently, but they all tap into forces that exist far beyond the limits of any single planet. Their stories, they are constantly dealing with intergalactic civilizations, ancient empires, celestial threats, and events that can change the balance of the entire universe. It's at this point in the hierarchy that Marvel truly opens up, revealing just how vast its universe really is. As enormous as the cosmic side of Marvel is, there are still beings that exist on an even higher level. This is where the abstract class begins. These aren't simply powerful characters flying through space or firing bigger energy blasts. They are living embodiments of the universe's most fundamental concepts. Things like death, eternity, infinity, and oblivion, they are ideas. Their existence is woven into the fabric of reality, and the universe simply wouldn't function the same without them. They rarely get involved in ordinary conflicts because their responsibilities extend far beyond the concerns of individual heroes, planets, or even entire galaxies. Eternity is the living embodiment of the entire Marvel universe. Infinity represents the endless expanse of space, while death governs the natural end of all living things. Oblivion embodies the endless void and non-existence, standing as one of the oldest and most mysterious forces in creation. Above many of them sits the Living Tribunal, a being tasked with maintaining balance throughout the entire multiverse. Whenever one force grows too powerful or reality is threatened, the Living Tribunal has the authority to intervene. These beings don't gain their powers through science, mutations, magic, or divine heritage. Their power comes from the simple fact that they exist as the universe's highest fundamental principles. Because of their role in creation, abstract beings usually operate on a scale that's almost impossible to imagine. Their conversations can decide the fate of entire universes. Their presence can reshape reality, and even the most powerful cosmic characters often recognize that these entities exist on another level entirely. Galactus, Celestials, and many other cosmic powerhouses may command incredible strength, but even they acknowledge the authority of beings like the Living Tribunal. In short, abstract entities exist to preserve the balance of reality. And finally, at the very top of Marvel's entire hierarchy stands a class occupied by just a single being. Above every hero, every villain, every god, every cosmic entity, and even every abstract being, there is the one above all. This is the ultimate creator of the Marvel Universe, the source from which everything else ultimately exists. Every galaxy, every universe, every timeline, every dimension, and every living being can be traced back to this single supreme presence. Unlike every class we've talked about so far, there isn't another character that rivals or shares this position. The hierarchy simply ends here. The one above all doesn't spend time fighting battles or trying to conquer the universe because there is nothing left to conquer. The character exists as the highest authority in all of Marvel's creation. On the rare occasions that the one above all appears, it's usually there in moments of enormous importance, often offering guidance, wisdom, or reminding characters of the bigger picture rather than solving every problem with force. These appearances are incredibly uncommon, which makes each one feel even more significant. Marvel has intentionally kept the character mysterious over the years, allowing fans to interpret the true nature of the supreme being while preserving the sense of awe surrounding the top of the hierarchy. So, ending the video with a bit of recap, we started with ordinary humans who relied on nothing but training and determination, then moved through technology, scientific transformations, genetics, magic, gods, cosmic forces, and living embodiments of reality itself. Each class expanded the scale of Marvel's universe a little further, revealing bigger worlds, greater powers, and all their forces, shaping existence from behind the scenes. And at the very end of it all sits the one above all, the single being above every other class we've explored. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.